Tanya Janka, and I wrote a book. This book, it is called, wait a minute. It's called Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. And in the end of each chapter are a bunch of questions. It's a textbook to teach you about how to build secure software. And it focuses on the subfield of application security. So there's computer science, then there's security, and then there's the security of software, which is application security. And I wrote a book all about it because I'm obsessed with it. And so at the back of each chapter are questions that I pose to the reader, and I have some simple answers, but I didn't feel that that was adequate enough to answer all the questions that are out there. And I wanted more opinions. So I invited a bunch of professionals I know who I happen to be, acquaintances or friends with, who are super knowledgeable, to come and discuss each chapter with me once per month for all of 2021. This month is chapter 7, which is building an application security program. And I have 2 guests today. Let's bring out the guests. Yes. And so they are Grant Onders. Did I say that right? Onders?
Yep.
Awesome. And Matt Tesoro. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a bit about themselves. So Grant, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Tanya. So my name is Grant Onders. I am currently on the Global Board of Directors for OWASP. I'm an AppSec geek. Just like Tanya, I love this stuff. I started off breaking things, red team, and then got paid to defend things and realized that sucked because red team always wins. And then realized that the only way to actually make it work was to help developers to do things right. So that's why I got involved in OWASP, and that's what I do today. So when I'm not on the board or helping out with one of the projects, I'm teaching developers how to write code that's more secure. That's me.
Nice.
Awesome.
Matt?
Me. So yeah, I started out life as funny enough, a developer for applications, web applications, back when like JSP was a new nifty thing. Did that for a while, moved to a different job where I hated the environment I was developing in, so much so that I started running the server so I could develop in an environment I liked. And that somehow inspired me to get into this security thing, because now these servers that I used to just throw my apps on were my babies. So I did a bunch of sysadmin work for a while, writing code, honestly. I guess I was full stack before it was even a word. I don't know. But anyway, I did that for a long time, got the security bug, mostly in keeping my hardware from getting owned, and started pen testing. Did pen testing for quite some time, mostly almost entirely web app pen testing. Got a little tired of the wham bam thank you ma'am life of a consultant doing just testing, because it was it's Monday, here's your creds, go poke at something, and on Friday write up a report, and then rinse and repeat the next week. And I wanted to deal with the flip side of security, like the you have a vulnerability, you have a business case, we have to make these two meet in the middle somewhere and be sane, and that's really what it is when you're running an AppSec program. And that's what I did. I went inside to Rackspace and worked there for a while. Worked at Pearson, worked at Duo Security, all running AppSec programs, and that's what I'm doing now today, mostly as a consultant, but not only as a consultant. And it's evolved around a OWASP project called OWASP Defect Dojo, which is a vulnerability aggregation tool that lets you push all your stuff into one sane place with one sane model. And that's probably enough.
And if you haven't checked out Defect Dojo, definitely do so, please. It's worth it.
It's
so
definitely
awesome.
worth the price.
Oh yeah, well worth the
It's
price.
free.
We could double the price and it'd still be worth it.
Oh yeah.
Vandana sends a message to say that she won't be here today, but she wishes everyone a good time. Vandana Verma was invited to come today, but she has lots of stuff to do, like sleep, because she's in India. And the time slot for this show is really not good if you know Indian time. And so she's not going to make it, but she sends her best wishes. And she's also on the board of directors for OWASP, just like Grant and just like Matt used to be. And so we have a lot of key OWASP players on this call today. Thank you. So this whole chapter is about what an AppSec program or application security program could look like. But what is an AppSec program? Like, do either, like, I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on like why and what, and who wants to go first?
I'll take a stab at it. So in my Rackspace days, which was when I first really was really running at we called it a product security group, but it's an AppSec program. And I realized I kind of had to change the previous mindset I had. I obviously couldn't treat it like a consultant where I had an engagement week and a time box thing, and here's a report and I walk away. You actually had to deal with the interactions between the teams and how you make those work. And so for me, the interesting thing about AppSec is, I mean, you do have to do the testing and all that's very important, but the feedback loops and how you incentivize what you consider to be the right action amongst those teams is really important. Like a great lesson I learned at Rackspace was we had a issue that cut across several teams, and I'm pushing them to, resolve this issue. And I'm getting one team super progressive, man, they knocked it right out in maybe a week. It was very quick. The other team, not so much. And so I called a meeting with them and said, well, that's, they're talking through their issues and they're giving me reasons why this can't happen. And I said, well, that's fine. I understand. But, how about I get the other team to come help you? Because obviously, they figured it out, so they could give you some pointers. And engaging their ego, OMG, did that make them, no, we don't need their help. What are you talking about? We can fix this here. So that to me, one of the interesting things about an AppSec program is it is about making the most secure software, but you have to interact with all these different constituencies. You have to interact with the product owners in the case of Rackspace, as well as the development teams that are making the software, and your own management team that wants you to, we can't have criticals in production kind of mentality, right? All those have to be balanced. So it's an interesting place to be. And as much as it's a technical job, there's a lot of politicianing you have to do as well.
Yeah. I feel like you spend like half of your day just trying to convince people to let you do your job.
Or why the world won't end if you actually do test and prod and those kind of things. Yes. Like I can remember telling someone it's called a controlled pen test because we do it in a controlled fashion. And don't just spray packets willy-nilly at your production site hoping I can take it offline, because nobody wins when that happens. Now, it does happen.
Yes.
I've done that, and it's rather awful. But that's life, right?
Yeah. And also, if your app is really, really, really that delicate, how is it doing in prod, right? If someone touches it, it might crumble down. Don't you want us to be the one that does that in a controlled way versus a stranger who has less than nice intent?
Definitely. I remember playing with the pagination on a particular app where, you the 20 per page, 15 per page. And that was actually a parameter that got sent into the web app. And this was a large insurance company in the US. So I picked Smith, right? That's a common US name. There's a whole bunch of them. So I did show me all the people that have a policy whose name are Smith, and they gave me this list, and it said 8,000, Smiths were in their database. So I just changed the paid size to that number, to 8,000. I captured the variable, changed it to 8,000, and sent it in. And the app just didn't respond for 12 minutes. And even better, I was on site at the client when this happened. So I'm thinking, oh God, they put me in the basement. I'm going to have to walk upstairs and tell the guy who hired me, I just killed your thing. So I madly called a coworker to say, please test this out. Can you hit this? And they're like, yeah, it's still coming up. It's really slow, but it's okay. But it took 15 minutes, and it did actually render the page, which, props to that app. It didn't die. But man, how many of those requests does it take to make that app die? I did one, right? So you parallelize that, and then whoop, there goes the app.
So that kind of tees well into how I see AppSec programs, because application security is just an aspect of quality for applications. QAs are doing, back in the 90s, this sort of stuff to applications, right? It's not an unusual set of testing parameters. It's not a weird thing to test for QA people. We've now moved into the world where QAs and devs are the same people, where you're testing your own code. How well it scales, how well it performs, that's important. How well it performs from a security perspective, yeah, people tend to hide from that a little bit, but it is all part of the same suite, right? ISO 25010 is application quality controls, and security is like the third from the right hand of that spectrum. So, do all these things, and the last one is kind of reliability. That's the one that everyone cares about, because that's, Google kind of drew that line there. Just over that line is security. That's where we sit. And so AppSec programs are all about helping people to understand that reliability, that box that they're beginning to understand. Just a little bit outside that box is where we want them to sit. And it's almost as important, almost as visible. And I feel like we're spending a lot of time explaining why that's something they should care about. But other than that, it's quality. And as long as you can understand or help devs to understand that it is their quality, they'll get involved with it.
Well, I've liked to use that kind of quality aspect against people that are arguing for fixing something. In other words, like, please show me the requirement where it says I can inject a script tag and have an alert box open, because I don't believe we have one of those. So, can we
show me the functional requirement for the SQL injection I just did, or the cross-site scripting I just did?
Can you please tell me the user story where the users are wanting to cross-site script themselves or their fellow customers? This is not probably an intended functionality, right?
It's bonus functionality, Matt. That's just
bonus. Yes,
that's what we did in the innovation script, right? Or sprint, rather, right? The innovation sprint was spent making sure that we could have injections. Yeah, don't do that.
Excellent.
Do you feel like with an AppSec program? Because I felt when I had an AppSec program that at first it was when I was a dev. Right. And I would be in charge of all the security things. And then eventually I was on the security team, and I felt like half my job was like trying to convince the development managers that I was allowed to take time from their devs, and like that I was not wasting that time, and that what I was trying to convince them to, like, my bugs had equal value to their bugs and weren't like less important. Have either of you run into that?
Oh, most assuredly. I like that you're bringing back memories of, we did a very large effort to threat model Rackspace's cloud. In essence, all the bits that made up all the cloud products at Rack, which was a whole bunch of things. And inevitably, to do a threat model, I need kind of the senior architect or head, the senior dev, maybe a PM, and a couple other people in a room. And from a organizational perspective, that's expensive, right? These guys are sidelined for an hour or two. They're not doing their thing. And what do I get out of it, right? Was one of the questions. Like, you want to take my lead dev offline for an hour or two. What do I get? Like, why? Why am I not having him or her crank out code like crazy? Well, one of the things I would do is say, look, you guys, this was a rackism anyway, and this is usually generally true anyway. You guys have no diagram of how your thing works. You just kind of have this institutional knowledge amongst the team that the thing calls the other thing, that has a queue that writes to this other something, and you kind of know it, and maybe it's like surfaced across 47 wiki pages in small pieces, but none of it is coherent. So one of the things I will give you is this beautiful diagram of how your thing works, right? So it wasn't, I'm going to do a threat model. I'm like, hey, let's get together and make this wonderful diagram. Now, I was thinking of it as a DFD, data flow diagram. But for the teams, it was like a picture of your thing. When you get the new person in, like that fresh dev comes in and they have to figure out this thing that is the cloud servers for Rack, let's say, you can give them a diagram. And that is kind of worth an hour of some senior people's time to get that laid out to where you understand. And then the fun thing was, we did all these threat models. We ended up taping them all up over the walls in this one part of the castle, which is what they called the headquarters of Rack in this old mall in San Antonio. But we taped them up all over this wall, and we started taking, quite honestly, thread and connecting the diagrams. Like, this cloud thing calls this other cloud thing. So we were drawing, and we made this huge like spaghetti diagram of printed out threat models in string. And we were finding devs coming over and looking at it to figure out like how the cloud worked. So we ended up one of the groups had a huge plotter, and we ended up merging all these threat models together, making this huge like poster of Rack's cloud. And that stood up on the wall in the security group, in the product security team. And man, people, that was like, they'd walk by and go, oh, this is really cool. Look, we call this. And we discovered things like little silly services that in isolation looked horribly unimportant. Like, I'll give you a customer ID and you'll give me their home address or something silly like that. Oh my goodness, every single cloud product talked to. So this like one-off stupid service that's kind of like an addresser, like, who cares, is suddenly like mission critical to your whole stinking cloud. So those kind of findings are really useful. And there's an interesting evolution. When we started the product security group at RAC, I came out of what was a corporate security group that was not well liked by product, to be really blunt. And so I had to build a lot of trust and goodwill, right, with these teams. And so a lot of it was a little bit of cajoling and a little bit of poking with the stick, quite honestly, of like, no, I'm sorry, like VP says you have to do this. We're going to do this. But if you could like demonstrate some value after a while and have some good conversations with them, we got to where I knew I won at RAC. I had a product team come over to me and say, hey, we're thinking about making this change to the auth. And we're not sure how it should work. We're having an argument in our team, like Johnny thinks this and Sally thinks that. How should we solve this? And we put it on a whiteboard and talked through it. And then they left and we figured out a good way to do it. And I just thought, ka-ching. I'm done here. Because that was huge. You know, like instead of me chasing them, our team had been around long enough and demonstrated value that they were actually now coming to us for advice proactively, which is huge. But a lot of that was like, I think the key thing is, well, the way you either build or erode trust at great speed is presenting actionable things to the teams, right? If you just hand them the PDF of the scanner that says it's bad and you haven't actually validated that it's truly bad, you're done. Because at RAC in particularly, we had a lot of really smart people knocking around and they go, no, you're stupid. This is not how this works. That scanner or that whatever tool has told you the wrong answer. Go away. And then the next time I bring them something that's real, obviously it's like the boy cry wolf. They don't trust you. You're done, right? So a lot of that is unfortunately sitting through some painful times to breed goodwill with those teams that you're interacting with. But once you have that, it is so nice.
So the Nirvana at Rackspace for the AppSec program was, we're a consulting function. Come talk to us when you have stuff that you want to talk about that you think we might know about, because you trust us to know about these things.
Yep, absolutely.
It sounds like it's building trust.
Yeah, building trust is a big part.
Well, I mean, like put yourself in the shoes of one of the product team developers, right? You've got a list of junk you got to get done by a date, and that's usually very tight, and you don't have a lot of wiggle room, and inevitable unknown problems like trip you up. And on top of this random group who isn't really part of your team is telling you to do these other things that you're not even sure what the heck they are. Like that's I get why they don't want you around. You're like, oh God, it's security. Well, there goes the meeting, kind of a thing. So you're really right about the trust. It's a huge aspect of it. And the other something that I think is a harder part of being a part of a product or an AppSec team, particularly if you don't have a development background, is, and this is just kind of a human nature thing, I think, is being able to talk the talk, like, hey, in the CI/CD, I noticed using Jenkins and Jenkins is calling this thing. And, I noticed that when you're doing the pip install, you're not doing that. You're just like throwing out terms that say, RAC was a very Python-y place. So you're throwing out terms that demonstrate like, I've actually done stuff in Python. I'm not coming to you from this, like I read it in a book and scanner tells me it's bad and you've got to go fix perspective. Now, I mean, I never wrote a whole heck of a lot of code. I mean, I did for a couple of years as a actual developer. But even then, like in little silly things, like I find a vulnerability in your service, I write 20 lines of Python and hand you a thing that exercises my vulnerability. And I tell you, hey, when you're trying to fix this, until this thing says it's happy, it's not fixed, right? It took me half an hour maybe to knock that thing out, if that. And I made a great friend when I did that. I also unfortunately named one kind of snarky about the product I did. That didn't win me friends. So don't do that. There was a product called Atom Hopper, and I figured out how to DOS it, and I wrote a script called Atom Dropper. And I found out later, I didn't think about it.
No.
The developer reached out to me. He was like, "Hey, can you give me that thing that knocks our service off?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I attached it to an email and sent it. And I had another friend of mine that sat by that team in the castle at RAC, and he said they exploded when they saw the name. So I had to apologize for that one. That was that's a lesson of what not to do.
Yeah.
You have to remember, this was his baby, right? You basically said it was ugly.
And gave him an automatic kick the baby machine with the ugly reference, you know?
Yeah. Kick the ugly baby machine.
Yeah.
You gave him.
Yeah, that was a lesson learned. But hey, you know, what can you do? I did only make that mistake once, right? So
yeah.
That's good. That's good. Grant, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I started my first AppSec program sort of by accident because we kept having all these pen test results. And I was like, we got to do something better than what we're doing. Like, right. But then since then, I've worked with tons of companies to like help them launch their AppSec programs, et cetera. And so like a thing that I've come across a lot, and I'm curious as to if you or if Matt's come across this, but where they're like, oh yeah, our AppSec program is going to be this SAST tool and this DAST tool. And like, they name a bunch of products and they're like, and that's our program. And I'm like, oh, I usually think of a program as like, you know, here's goals we want to achieve. And these tools and these processes and these people are going to help me reach these goals. That's how I view it. But have you run into that, Grant?
Yeah. So you're definitely pushing my buttons here, Tanya, because I get pulled in a lot with commercial projects where like an AppSec tool provider who may or may not be awesome, right? Some of them are really great. Some of them are expensive and not so great, but some of them are really great. And they'll be like, customer X is using product Y now, our product, and it's amazing, but they're not seeing the benefits yet because tools don't win the war. But yeah, I see that a lot. In fact, here's one I can talk about because it's not a product that's terrible. It's not a product that costs money, and it's no one's going to be upset with me for talking about it. It's OWASP Zap, right? So
I knew it.
so I was pulled into, and this is, I can even talk about the company because they've actually presented with me on the subject. But I was pulled into HMRC, who are the British tax department. So they're like going through a lot of fast dev work. Almost everything in the UK is now like online access, and COVID hit, and that meant a lot of tax break type stuff needed to get out there quickly. So HMRC was ramping up their ability to put new apps out there. Their customers are a lot of people, and they're wanting to protect it. So let's get something in the place there. So let's build an AppSec program around a free open source project. All of these things should be ringing alarm bells, called Zap. Now, Zap is fantastic, but Zap doesn't make an AppSec program, right? It is a tool that does a really good job, but it isn't your program. They brought me in to do the program, I think primarily because something on my CV said OWASP. Fortunately, Simon is here in the UK too, and we were able to make things work, and everything just kind of flowed together. But they realized pretty quickly that you can't just build around a tool, and it took some time for that. I mean, the interaction with the rest of the teams to happen, but tooling doesn't make the program. It's people, process, and there are some tools. So start with a tool.
It's like having a chair that that's supposed to have like a stool that's supposed to have like three things that hold it up, and you're like, we have one, and you're like, and your bum's on the ground.
Well, I bought a really fancy saw, therefore I can build a house.
Exactly. Or I have the best keyboard. I'm going to write all the best code now, right? Because my keyboard is amazing.
It is all about the keyboard.
So I think that's a really good description because I mean we all have great keyboards, right? Keyboards are awesome, but
Oh yeah. Mine
they're not
has 2 pieces. There's 2 pieces to my
Yeah,
keyboard
2
because it's
parts.
all ergonomic-y.
awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Ooh,
There's
lights, fancy
See?
lights.
And also split keyboard, right? So
Mhm.
keyboards, we all have fantastic keyboards and we all love our tools. And tools are important, but unless you actually understand how to write code, having a cool keyboard doesn't get you there. And unless you have a process for how you're going to get that code from, my mind through the keyboard, through some kind of version control system and maybe some testing and then eventually onto the system at the end, unless you have a process for that, stuff doesn't work. And all of that is required for that AppSec program, right? A program isn't just one part.
Yeah, and conversely, the cheapest, awfulest keyboard, you can write beautiful code with it. It may not be fun, but you can get the job done.
You can get it done. Yeah. And there's some beautiful, cheap, basic tools that we can use in our AppSec programs. And I'm sure that both of you have built AppSec programs around completely open source tools. I nearly said OWASP tools, but primarily probably OWASP tools, but definitely open source tools. DFAC Dojo it's been a part of like 6 of the past 10 AppSec programs I've built. DFAC Dojo has been part of that, right? So, I mean, there are some great tools that don't cost a lot of money, but the tool itself doesn't do anything unless you have the program. And the program is people, process, tools.
Yep, 100%.
Have you found that, so I consult at all these different places. And so I ended my consulting at one place recently because I'm taking on something new and I just, something has to give, right? And so they're like, okay, so, you've been with us 2 years now and like we have these things set up and this, and they're like, so we're thinking about getting another tool. And I'm like, no, you need to spend that time fixing bugs. I don't care if you sit your bum down next to, there are certain teams and they know who they are. And I'm like, you need to go spend quality time. And by that, I mean being annoying to get them to fix those bugs. I'm like, don't spend another $100K. And I was like, how about this? If you have $100K to buy a tool, you know what I want you to buy instead? 3 interns. And I want you to teach 1 how to fix injection. I want you to teach 1 how to fix cross-site scripting. And I want you to teach 1 how to do security headers. And then set them forth upon your organization. And just get them to be like, I shall fix all the bugs. And his brain kind of exploded. And I was like, don't buy another tool. You have like 6 tools and your tools are fine. You have crap ton of results. Just please, for the love of God, fix them. And he's like, yes, ma'am. I'm like, I'm sorry I give you the crappy answers you don't want. Because automating and hacking things is fun. It's fun, right? Like it's really fun to like add another tool. You're like, haha, it's lighting up like our Christmas tree. But I don't want it to light up like a Christmas tree anymore.
So in my case, I'm like, take that money, take your product owners, the people who make decisions about what gets like scrubbed for the next sprint, and send them on some kind of training that will teach them to understand what decisions they're making when it comes to security, right? I mean, I get it, right? Delivery is about making some decisions, right? You trade off how quickly something can scale with how quickly you can get out the door. You trade off, you make these trade-offs all the time, and product owners are pretty good at that, right? They understand. And for the most part, they get the decisions right, but they don't get security. Like, and that's really our fault. As security people, we've kind of screwed this up because we haven't really explained to them exactly what the decision should be like and how likely is this to happen? And we have these risk matrices, but they don't really tell the story. So yeah, I agree. Take the money. Do not buy more tools. Tools are great. I love tools. I want all the tools. I have all the toys. Yeah. But
they have an amazing tool set already. Honestly, their tool set's really, really nice. And I'm like, first of all, finish implementing it. Basically, like, so there's like bigger companies that just buy other companies. And so like their code was good. It's the buying the other companies and then us training them again. And then like trying to teach them to do things the way that the rest of us are doing it. And it's just like, if you could just not buy a company every single month, like, and like, you don't want to tell your client what to do, right? Obviously. Yeah. Oh, there's a question in the chat, and someone was saying, what's their best tool? So what would I say is their best tool? So they were using like a bunch of things, and because they're client and confidentiality, I don't want to tell you their whole tool set, but they're using checkmarks, and they're like really, really doing a great job with it. Checkmarks is an old school SAST where basically like they bought some companies that had monolithic applications. And they were worried about running a DAS tool on it because they were so sensitive and delicate and archaic, maybe is a word. And so SAST is like a super safe scan that you can run that's not going to knock anything down. And I kid you not, one tool, so one app they bought had 43,000 vulnerabilities. I'm like, obviously these are fake. Checkmarks, you are lying to me. And I checked the first like 150 and they were all true positives. And I was like, yeah, but we started fixing it. It's much better now. It has a very nice WAF that it gets to spend quality time with. Yeah, it's much safer now, and they're continuing to make it so much better. And yes, checkmarks cost a fortune. I agree with you.
I'm gonna raise another flag for another OWASP project, and not one of the projects that I'm actually like hectically involved in, although I have written some code for it. But the benchmark project tells you which tools do well, and the reality is that SAST is the best tool for a security perspective because it will always get you a result. But about half the time it's wrong. And if you have 1 million vulnerabilities, as Tanya,
43,000 in one
43 vulnerabilities, there's still 20,000 that are definitely vulnerabilities, right? Because the other half might be wrong, but you still have a lot of vulnerabilities there. Best tools are the tools that work with the teams you have. If you would find a tool that will find all your vulnerabilities with no noise, the only ones that do that are IAST. And the problem with IAST is then your teams have to have all the testing. If they don't have testing, which if they're writing bad code, they probably don't, then you're screwed. So the best tools are a series of tools that provide you with the right levels of results. And SAST works well when you have to.
Yeah, the other like quiet downside of SAST that you won't hear a vendor tell you is that there's a significant amount of tuning before that you've got a profile that fits the app that you wrote. And from their perspective, I get it. Like writing a SaaS tool that can take any code in any crazy freaking way somebody wants to write it and make sense of it is tricky. And I get it. And even worse with like the dynamic languages like JavaScript, God help us all. So I totally understand that's a hard problem space. But you get these vendors saying like magic our SaaS tool and push button, results come out and everyone's happy. And you're like, well, no, like the actionable thing I mentioned earlier isn't happening, which is a big problem. And so, I when I've done early kind of toe dipping with teams, I do like tools that talk to repos, because just generally getting access to a repo is a lot less tricky politically than getting access to a running app and making sure you don't knock over a production, or is it in staging, and is staging just a nightmarish a joke of a clone of what really is happening in prod. Like all those issues go away when you're just looking at the code level. And if nothing else, SaaS can be interesting to give you what I would like to call a smell test, right? If you have 12 apps and you run it against all of them and one of them has an inordinate amount versus the other, well, if nothing else, that's the guy that needs some love. Yeah.
In the chat, Ben was saying what we need is an OWASP project with every vulnerability to measure tool effectiveness against. And so Juice Shop is a really amazing project from OWASP, and a lot of people suggest that people should do that with it. However, Juice Shop is very special in that it is made not to have automated tools work well on it. It is for learning super awesome manual pen testing skills and like
with
finding security
code.
But my friends at Neuralegion, so I am on the advisory board for Neural Agent, but I'm on the board because we're friends. And basically, they built a vulnerable app called Broken Crystals. So you can go to brokencrystals.com, and it's modern like Juice Shop, but it is made for tools to pick up and light up like a Christmas tree. And they were hoping to turn it into some sort of benchmarking thing, and none of us know how to do that. And so it works well with their tool that they made, of course. But they're like, I'd really love to like just invite all the other vendors to like pew, 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 and like just smash the crap out of it so that we can all make sure we're all finding the same things. And like, obviously, if other tools are finding things theirs aren't, they're going to go check it out and vice versa. And so, of course, obviously, I found a bug in it because that's how I am. But that's okay. But yeah, I released a new course yesterday that is free where I use broken crystals and I teach you like how to scan it with a DAS tool and just like what the results mean and what is, so it's very broken. This app is very, very broken crystals. But I'm going to share a link to the free course. Everything in it is free. You use a free trial and everything. And that's the thing I'm promoting. I am checking my marketing box right now. Yes, good job, Tanya. I always forget.
Well done.
I'm so bad, guys. I'm so bad. Like after they'll be like, you didn't mention the course we released yesterday. And I'll be like, so thank you, Ben, for inadvertently reminding me.
Tanya, literally the only person in this community who's worse at marketing than you are is possibly Adam Shostak with his course. He like forgets to market the courses until the day before, and then I see it pop up on Twitter, and he's like, hey, we still have like 4 places available. I don't know how we filled the other 27 or 26 because I forgot to announce it. But yeah, thank you. Free course. It's free stuff, man. Get out there. And I want to note that WeHack Purple has also partnered with OWASP at this point. I'm going to like blurb about this. And there's a free course. If you're an OWASP member, you can get the first part of the 3-part series. Like the thing that everyone should do in AppSec, if you're in AppSec, do those 3 courses. The first one's free if you're an OWASP member. So get a membership.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya. Do the courses.
Many people have actually messaged me to say I couldn't afford the $500 for the course. So instead I became an OWASP member. So thanks.
There we go.
I'm like, it works for me. Yeah.
Well, and at least like if they go through the first one, they've got their feet wet and they kind of understand the direction and the path they need to take. You know, maybe it might take them longer. And I would seems obvious that going to your course would shorten that ramp up time, but at least you're not walking in the wrong direction when you start.
Yes.
I think taking the first course is likely to get you a gig, get you a job working in AppSec, which means that possibly course 2 and 3 are either something you can afford or something you can convince your boss to pay for because you've done the first one. So, you know, it's a skills ladder, and this is the first rung for free.
Okay, and here's the link because I'm doing the marketing stuff. So basically, OWASP announced it, or you could just, if you go to the WeHack Purple blog, so wehackpurple.com, click on blog, and then I wrote an article about our partnership. I copied most of what Andrew wrote in his article because he did such a good job. I'm like, oh, I like the way he worded that. Yeah. And we're like announcing the same thing. So I felt that was maybe okay. And and then there's just a link where you can join. And we've had some very smart hackers notice that there's lots of ways to get that course, even if you're not an OWASP member. But I'd really like it if you were an OWASP member, if you get the course. But we won't throw you out if you are a trickster. We're open. We'll just leave it at that.
I do want to point out that I couldn't, even as an OWASP member, figure out how to get the free course, and then accidentally got the free course without using my OWASP membership, and then realized what I'd done. And then reversed back from that and went, oh, wait, sorry. And that was something I was actually going to chat to you about, but I assume lots of people have probably told you already.
We are totally aware. And honestly, like a bunch of those people bought other courses. So we're like, we're fine.
Yeah, exactly. No, and the truth is you're giving it away. And those people who did that and aren't OWASP members, like, maybe join us.
Become an OWASP member.
Yeah, join us on the community. Like, it's great.
Join us, and also join the We Hack Purple community, because you just generally should. But I feel like we should go back to the book, because I'll just hit the whole time, and then I'll get in trouble. Okay, so there were a couple program goals that I talked about in the book that people could set. And so I was thinking that like we could talk about some of them, and then we could go into the questions when we're ready. Or you could bring up basically goals that you've had in your program goals that like you've really liked, that you might want to share and might be cool. So for instance, so like one that I always want to do when I start an AppSec program, and they're always like, why do we have to do that, is like creating an inventory. I find it really hard, especially like if I'm a consultant going in somewhere and I'm like, okay, so do you have an inventory of all of your apps? And they're like, well, no, like, you know, this one team is in charge of these 11 apps, so they like keep track of that. And then this other team, and I just assume the teams have lists, and I'm like, oh crap. And so then I want to create a list of all their apps so I can make sure that, like, you know, if I'm going to do a DAST or SAST or SCA or whatever I'm doing, that I do it on every single app. And like, if we're going to do code review or whatever it is that I want to threat model every app, I need to know which ones we have. And some places are like, I don't see the value in that. Or they're like, that's too hard. And I'm like, I don't care. So what do you think of inventory? Do you think that it's a worthy activity, or?
I think it's crucial. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. Like, one of the things that we accidentally did when we created Dojo, Defect Dojo, and we created that at Rackspace in the product security group because we were having to deal with all these snowflakey vendor or even tool provided outputs that we wanted to normalize. That's really the problem we were trying to solve. And we did. But one of the things that came out of that we didn't even expect is, well, in the Dojo model of things, you have an application that belongs to some, or a product that belongs to some kind of product type. And then you do some sort of assessments, engagements, and Dojo speak against that product type, right? Well, you end up, if you test enough things, having a list of applications. So that product list in Dojo ends up being your inventory if you don't have one. And in a lot of cases where it's too hard, to me, is fine. Yes, it's an elephant. We don't want to eat it. One bite at a time. Yeah. Every time you test something, note down the app. And yes, you're going to have a who knows what percent, because you don't have a total count, but you'll have some subset of all the apps. And the longer you go, the more you will have a complete knowledge of those. And I think the expectation is, in some of the larger companies I've been at, they were probably never going to have a complete list. But if we had an 80 to 90% list, I can start doing interesting comparisons. I've, done the third-party library checking across a third of our known apps. Like, I can say those things if I have an inventory. I can give you a number, right? Well, we've done 75, SAS scans against apps this year. Well, that's great. Do you have 75 apps or 7,000? Like, I don't know what the coverage is. And one of the things I've liked doing product security is having what I would call a shallow test across the suite of things, right? Like, I'd like to have all of my stuff, in essence, benchmarked by being assessed by the same or similar process or tool, right? So then I can start, those actually become natural feedback loops to say, these 12 apps on this end of the spectrum that are lighting up the tool like nobody's business, I need to spend my precious time with those, because these other ones, at least according to this tool, are okay, and I can maybe let them go for a bit. So that if you don't have that inventory, you can't make those inferences and understand like a relative position of that app. Like, this one compared to the other one is good or bad. You can't really do that. You're shooting in the dark. And I mean, if nothing else, people's time and efforts are a very limiting function of a AppSec team. So why not optimize those by like hitting the things that are most important? But you can't really know what's most important unless you know what all the things are. It's kind of fundamental.
I just want to mention before you answer, Grant, that I agree so much with Matt. And also that someone just signed up for the OWASP course. Thank you.
Woohoo.
So Grant, what do you think about inventory?
So I've gone back and forth on the whole concept of Sbomb versus inventory.
Can you
No-
explain what Sbomb stands for?
So Sbomb is the software bill of materials. And we kind of stole that as software people from manufacturing, who understand that if you want to build a widget X, you need little parts A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And essentially that's how software is built, right? We have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we put it together and we have widget X that we then plug into some service that is probably part of a bigger picture, right? So we probably have A or widget X that's part of X, Y, Z that's actually a service, and it becomes very complicated. But the idea of knowing what pieces make up the thing that we're testing, it's fundamental to be able to test it, right? If you don't know what versions and what things are involved in what we're building, how do you know whether the thing you tested is the thing that's now running down the line? There's no way of doing that. So Sbomb is important in many ways. But even before we get to Sbomb, the fundamental question about what do we have in order for us to test, which is essentially what Matt was saying. I mean, Matt was saying from the other way around, as we test it, we have a list of things of what we have, things that we care about because we tested them. But fundamentally, as a CISO, I want to know what are all the things I should care about? Like, what are the things I should have tests for? If I don't have that, it becomes very complicated. Inventory is important. And there are tools out there. There's some really good tools like Backstage, which provides some like fundamental basic, this is how you do testing. Well, this is how you have your pieces of your puzzle. These are the services that you're worrying about. And then you can plug other things into that, but there are other tools out there. I mean, there are tons of ways of keeping track of it. But you should have an idea of, at least as a team, what are the pieces we care about? Because my view on AppSec is slightly different in some ways, because I think that the team that's building the software should be doing the AppSec on the software. So they should be the ones who care about these things. But teams should care about what are my things? What is my scope of responsibility? It's critical.
Well, in of the 20-ish years that I've been doing these kind of things, I've run into one company that had a very thorough list of their apps, and I was floored because it was the one time in that many years that I found this. But two, they could do some really amazing things because they put in the effort to do that. Now, from the assessment perspective, they can say, and they had a criticality rating built into the system as well, which is rather clever. So now you could say, we're only going to do the critical externals, right? We're only going to look at those. Like the things that are critical apps to our business and are facing external, that's all we're going to test. And I can know how many those are.
What I love about that is that when they say critical, they mean business critical rather than security critical, which is fundamentally so much more important, right? If this app doesn't work, our business doesn't run, or we can't pay staff, or we can't collect money, or things that break our organization are going to go wrong.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And the beautiful too is then if for the same company, they had an issue of, we want to have more scope of testing. We want to get beyond, say, my critical external example. We want to go to high externals and maybe.
Wait, did you say internals. Beyonce? I'm like, oh, what?
No, I have
company ever. Sorry.
But yeah, no. But the cool thing is you could actually get a reliable count of, okay, that means we're going to go from doing 50 tests to 200 tests a year. Well, we have, 3 people that can do 50. Okay, if we're going to 200, we need to quadruple that. Like, you could do the math and get some rough numbers and actually come back to the business and say, you want us to do that? That's great. We'd love to do that. But I need N number of FTEs or contractors or something to make that happen, right? And you can now have super intelligent conversations with the business and also, quite honestly, not set yourself up for failure. Because if you're like, oh, yeah, I could probably do all the high externals, and you find out there's 8 times as many as you thought, that is not a place to be in.
Why? Exactly.
Yeah, you're going to have to renegotiate your promise, which is never a good place to be.
Yeah, I actually had one of my clients build out an inventory and it took like 2 or 3 months for them to do it. They had no inventory whatsoever. And then we had a security incident, like maybe 4 or 5 months in. And, I go to have a meeting with them about something else, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And I'm like, bring up the inventory. And then I'm like, which of them handle credit cards? Okay, it's these ones. So we just dismissed I'm like, which ones do this? And then we dismissed them. And I'm like, okay, so now we have this subset of 3 apps to investigate for this. And blah, and they're just like, whoa. And so after a week later, when everything's cleaned up, I'm like, could you imagine responding to that incident without that inventory? And they're just like, their jaws just all dropped. I'm like, do we feel it was worth the effort of me, how I really, really pushed for that? And they're like, oh yeah, we would be responding to that incident for 3 months. Right. And so, yeah, when you can show return on investment as a consultant, that's definitely a good way to get your contracts renewed.
Same thing with the really hairy Jenkins vulnerability at Rackspace. We had the idea of technologies that made up a product inside of Defect Dojo. And when this really hairy Jenkins vulnerability came up, instead of maybe end mapping and trying to figure out where all the Jenkins are, we knew all the teams that had them. It's just like you said, you go to the inventory, you go, I got to talk to these 12 teams, go talk to those 12 teams and done. It's not a 3 or 4 day fire drill. It's a couple of conversations over the course of a day and you're making progress.
Yeah, It did take a while for us with this incident because it turned out it wasn't us. It sounds weird, but there was sort of an overlap between us and another company. And it was if Visa contacts you, you pay attention to Visa. And it turned out it wasn't our fault. And it took us a while to prove because it's really hard to prove a negative. But eventually we were able to be like, haha, it wasn't us. And then they figured out who did the deed and everything was fine. But even just being able to prove for PCI compliance, they're going to kick the crap out of their audit. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
They're like, yeah. I have some more goals that I like to set that I discuss in the book and for an AppSec program. And one is teaching developers about secure coding and about security architecture, threat modeling, and educating devs. And I've had some companies say, if they don't show up for work knowing what they're doing, then we wouldn't have hired them. So blah, blah, blah. They should have learned this in school and they should just magically know. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah. What are your feelings on this? Do you think that it's the responsibility of the developer to learn on their own time? Do you think it's the responsibility of the organization? Is it a cross, or what do you two think?
You want to go first?
I'll jump in here. Hi, my name's Grant, and I'm currently one of the leaders for the OWASP Application Security Curriculum Project, which is trying to make teaching devs a thing. Fundamentally, we security people have screwed this up, massively screwed this up, because yes, developers should know how to code securely. They should totally own that. That should be their responsibility. But we took it away from them. We said security was different. We pretended it was special. And for many, many years, they've just let us deal with it. We don't have a chief reliability officer in any organization, not even Google. But we have a chief security officer or information security officer everywhere, right? So we kind of screwed this up. So yes, I think that developers should be taught how to do this properly. I think that we probably should go back to teaching it where we teach them to code. It should be part of code quality and how code quality happens. But maybe, just maybe, we have devs who are really good at what they do. They build awesome code for us. Maybe we should teach them what we think they should learn. And I've had the privilege of working with a number of organizations towards that goal. HMRC, who I'm going to pick on again because I've already mentioned them, and I feel in for a penny, in for a pound. they have they realized that DAST and implementing ZAP wasn't the way. So they helped the Application Security Curriculum Project build a foundational course, which they then taught all their devs. So basically, they developed curriculum for their devs and then made that available to OWASP as part of the community project. So thank you very much, HMRC. But that sort of thing, that should happen everywhere. I mean, we should be offering our devs some level of support, some level of education, and I mean, we understand that there's continuing education responsibilities. There are lots of third-party applications, third-party services that many of our companies use. I'm not going to mention any of them here now, but there are places like, and well, okay, I'll mention We Hack Purple because you guys do it too, right? There's a program of development work. People can go and learn stuff, and yes, they can choose to do that themselves, but probably better would be that their boss said, "Hey, all of you working on this project should have this qualification. Go and get the certification. Go get the stuff from Tanya. Go get trained by her, or go get trained by Grant because I do some training too. Do that stuff. Make it happen." Yeah, I feel very strongly developers need the education, and the fact that they don't have it is not their fault. We kind of made that happen, and we need to unmake that happen. And it needs to be a thing that a Tanya course is part of a university diploma, right? That should be a thing, something like that.
I'm trying.
Happen. Yeah, exactly.
Grant, all the universities tell me, "Oh, you don't have a PhD, so you can be an adjunct professor and you can work for less than minimum wage." And I'm like, "Oh, you can kiss my derriere. You make billions of dollars per year." And they're like, "Yeah, but you're not a real person because you're not part of our academia pyramid scheme. And so go away. We don't care if we are releasing stuff." And then they're like, "Oh, poor us. We can't find anyone to come work for us." But I could literally make the exact same amount, I kid you not, working as a greeter at Walmart.
Yep.
I taught at Texas, University of Texas in their CS department, and over the course of a semester, I made less than I made teaching 1 2-day training class. Now, it happened to be a well-subscribed class, but still, that's a full semester of driving to the university, going on campus, yammering in front of a bunch of students twice a week. Luckily, I got a Tuesday, Thursday, and having office hours, right? So that's a significant investment of
commitment.
Time. Yeah. And so, you're right. For you're like, wait a minute, I could do 1 or 2 training classes over the course of a handful of days, like maybe a week, and get a semester's worth of income. This is not to my advantage.
Oh, it's way less in Canada, Matt. It's 4,000 Canadian dollars per semester. Oh, and they want to own my curriculum after as well. Yeah. and you have to do 2 lectures and a lab and mark all your own papers for 4 months for 4,000 Canadian dollars. So that's just under 3,000 American dollars.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Working 400 hours.
So
assuming you can mark very quickly.
$800 a month.
Yeah.
Yep. And that is actually less than minimum wage in Canada.
And
so
it's more than my mortgage payment too.
It's like more than your mortgage payment? You mean it's less?
No, it's less. I said that backwards. Yeah. I mean, you couldn't get a crappy apartment in the small town I live in for that kind of money.
No.
I mean, that's
you couldn't get a half apartment.
Yeah. You could get a box under a bridge somewhere.
So we have a question in the chat, and so I'm gonna just make a small comment, and then we can answer the question. But when I learned to drive, my dad told me about turning left. He said, so if you're gonna turn left, he's like, you want to wait till there's time, but he's like, even if you have an advanced green, you want to look and make sure everyone's stopped on the other side. And I was like, why? I have the right of way. He's like, you'll still be dead though, so you'll be dead right. He's like, no one wants to be dead right. So always make sure it's okay first before you turn. It does not matter. It only matters that you're alive when you get there and that you don't get tickets. So he's like, so being more cautious is good. And it doesn't matter if you're right. And so when people are like, well, the developers should know this, I'm like, yeah, but they don't. So do you want to argue about whether you're right or not? Or do you want to release safe applications for your customers? And then they're like, why do you always have to be no fun, Tanya? And so here's a question from Rhiannon. So what is the line between what a developer should know about security and what an AppSec professional should know? There is, of course, overlap, but developers should be driven to be developers first. No? That's a hard question, Rhiannon.
I got an answer anyway. It may not be good. I think it's good, but who knows? That's my opinion of my own work. So I'm kind of grading my own papers there. But anyway, I think that the line or the difference is you may not, as a developer, need to understand how I inject, say, cross-site scripting or SQL injection. You need to know the flip side. You need to know the remediation side of it, right? There's sort of two sides to a vulnerability. There's someone who knows how to find and express that vulnerability by sending naughty characters in, let's say, and then somebody needs to know how to handle getting naughty characters in a way that the application doesn't fail or have a security vulnerability. So I really think that the line is the remediation side of it versus the attack side of it. Now, I've had a lot of developers that want to, like, okay, this is cool, I want to learn this, right? Or they see you using something like Zap Local Proxy and they've never even thought about that as a thing. And they're like, ooh, this is cool. I could, and the funny thing is you hear them say, I could totally debug those stupid API interactions with this. I'm like, yes, you could. Like, I want to be naughty to your API with this thing, but yes, you could like debug stuff with it. This is exactly what it's for. And the more you understand and the less black boxy like your work is, the better. So like that visibility is fantastic. But to me, that's the dividing line. And one short, I'm going to steal a little bit of time, stepping back a minute. For developers and if it should be trained or not trained, I think the biggest thing developers need is management buy-in to let them have the time to train. Because everybody wants that thing out yesterday, and any class, even if it's just a development class, is seen as delaying that going out the door. And you need to get buy-in to where managers say, nope, I'm going to give them X period to do this thing, and this thing happens to be security training.
Yeah, I agree. Grant, do you want to add?
I totally, like everything Matt just said, I buy in with. The only delta is that I would argue that an AppSec professional, every developer should be an AppSec professional. They're writing application security. They're writing applications securely for money. So the distinction between those two doesn't really exist. There are AppSec hackers. There are people like us who break people's code, but that's easy to do. That's not the hard part of the equation, and they should understand. And literally, it's so there's the EOP, which is the playing card game for threat modeling for application security professionals, and then Cornucopia, which is the threat modeling game for developers, right? This is the same deck of cards. In fact, I have a similar size deck. They're just slightly different in size. There's more for devs to know than there is for AppSec professionals to know, but it comes down to the same things, right? And literally, this deck is the developer side of what happens in this one. So what Matt said is completely true.
There's a really good question in the chat from Tulasi. I hope I said your name right. How can we build an application security program from scratch? So I'm going to dig at this first, and if either of you want to add on, that's awesome. But I look at the current system development lifecycle that they're following. So whether that be a waterfall or an agile thing or a DevOps thing, and then I try to look at places where I can add improvement and fit into what they are doing. So if you fit in nice and smooth to the way they're doing stuff, they're more likely to let you fit in nice and smooth. But if you're like, I'm going to add a bunch of gates to your DevOps process, and I want you to do these out of bound activities. I once worked somewhere and she's like, oh, we're going to do a code freeze for 3 weeks while we do a secure code review. So none of you are allowed to do anything. And I was like the team lead. And then the director left. And then my team were like, WTF, we can't not code for 3 weeks. I'm like, don't worry, just dig into the backlog. And then we just won't check any of that in until the end of the 3 weeks, right? So we're going to make our own branch where we're just going to fix everything, and then we'll check it in the moment that that's done. And that's what we did. And she was like, rah. I'm like, what, you want me to pay consultants at like $800 a day to do nothing? No. And so like, I look at what they're doing and I figure out how I can go into it. And then I always also, I try to get a sense of what the worst things are that are going on. So I usually like scan a whole bunch of stuff or gather up all the scans they've had. And I see if there's any things that repeat. And I immediately start with education around those things. So cross-site scripting, for instance, and I try to like meet everyone. I'm like, hey, we're having a lunch and learn, and I brought donuts. Yes, that's right, carbs and sugar. And then I try to get them all to come in, and then I'm like, I'm not scary. I will help you. No yelling. Yay! And try to like make myself seem not like the enemy, but hopefully someone that's going to help them, right? And try to start bridging that gap so that I can build trust and hopefully relationships where we can get stuff done together. And so like, that's how I start from scratch. I want to meet everyone. I want to try to address the bleeding things. And then I try to like work my way into their system development lifecycle. So it really depends on the way they're doing stuff. And that's how I start. What do you two want to add anything?
Besides the obvious, read your book. I'm looking at it over your shoulder there and thinking, like, it's right there, man. It's that purple thing behind her. Come on.
Wait.
The other side. I know. Yeah. But you really, like, some of the key points that I would emphasize and agree with wholeheartedly is fitting into their process. If you try to be the bull in a china shop and change things, that is the fastest way to get booted out of a place. Like, forget it. You're done. And the graceful interconnection with how the dev team works, you have to meet them where they are, right? If I go to a dev team and I expect them to use my funny little security tool, and I don't put their issues in their backlog in Jira because that's how they think, I should expect pushback, right? That's why the 500-page PDF lobbed via email to the dev teams is a losing argument, right? Hopefully no one does their development via 500-page PDFs lobbed around, right? You just need to meet them where they do their work and how they do their work. So yeah, totally agree with what you said. Grant?
I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything.
So the only thing I can add to that, I mean, yes, it's the process is about developing and delivering a product, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we make a super secure product if nobody wants to buy it or if it arrives to market too late. So the process of getting the product out there is what you need to tie into. And that's what both of you have said. The only point that I'd kind of like get in maybe a little differently is that my first target is the security team. And I talk to them about how, listen, I know it's scary. These guys are pushing code out like 2 or 3 times a day, and you have no idea, and it's super scary. And don't worry, it's okay, because the reality is agile delivery means that when you find a bug or they find a bug that's like super scary, 2 or 3 times a day you have an opportunity for them to fix that bug. So that's the first port of call, right? We tend to talk to security teams first because they get very antsy with dev teams running ahead. And we speak to a lot of dev teams who are trying to run ahead. From a dev team perspective, my first port of call outside of the security team, so the dev team side of things, the delivery team side of things, is product owners. They need to understand why they should care about security, why this type of vulnerability and not this type is important, and why this is a thing and this isn't, and why they need to make those decisions, right? They need to make the balancing act. And educating them is important, because if you get them on side, you'll find that they'll tend to initially balance very heavily towards security, which is okay, I guess, but not really, because it does affect the business. But they will eventually figure out that balance between security and delivery, and they'll get it right, because that's their job. That's what they do, right? They do it for all the other non-functionals. It's just about helping them understand this one. So you're right. Get on side with the dev team, get into their process, do what they're doing, help them do their thing their way. But first, get security out of their way, because the truth is security is in the way, because security doesn't get it mostly. And then get product owners on side, because product owners make decisions for them about what's important. And once you've got those two sorted, definitely dive into the dev teams, do dev teams the dev team way, and you're gonna be gold. It'll work. It'll just work.
Okay, I'm gonna set you both up for a question and like let you center in on the question. And so Matt, you can go first. But so in my book, I lay out a whole bunch of goals that I would set for an AppSec program, and they're sort of high level because you can't get that specific if you're just talking like to every team, right? Because it can't be every team. But what goal in the past have you set for a team or a company where you reached that goal and it was awesome, and why, and how did you get there? So I guess I'm asking you to tell us a success story of like a thing that you wanted to try to do and then you did it, like with me with doing the inventory with like that one client, and then we had an incident and it turned out having that inventory was just crucial, but we've actually ended up coming back to it like hundreds of times. It's been so magical, right? So when in the past have you set like some sort of goal or plan or project and then you did it, and then like what good stuff came of that?
Sure. I can definitely talk to that.
Okay.
And I can talk to that and even drop names, because I did there. If you look at my slideshow, you can find the talks where I dropped this company's name. But when I worked for Pearson, right at the time that I got at Pearson, there was 8, I think, entities that all came together as one big happy family under the CISO org. So, and the CISO org was a central, center of excellence that was supposedly going to handle all the things, and that included AppSec, and that's where I was. And besides the chaos of these 8 giant companies coming under one banner, we didn't really have any kind of a program. We had this sort of like, some people kind of did some SAST in different groups, but every of the 8 were different. And so the biggest thing we did is we went and sort of normalized our program. We said, okay, here's the things we care about. We own these tools already. At that time, we had Checkmarks, AppScan, we used Burp Suite, and Zap were the primary tools that we had. There was another group that had a different tool that we ended up getting vulnerability feeds from them, but it was not outside of our purview. But we normalized what we were going to do. We said, here's how we're going to grade apps. We're going to put it in 3 buckets. They're going to be the critical bucket, the medium bucket, and the not so critical bucket, the low bucket. And we came up with the metric of how we're going to put these apps into there. It was very lightweight. It wasn't heavy duty. We could, talk to a product owner for 20 minutes probably and have an idea of where they fell. But the biggest thing was, for each of those buckets, we then established what testing happens, right? If you're a critical app, you get the full Monty. You get all the tools. You get a manual test. We do everything you can. If you're in the middle bucket, we're going to run mostly automated tools. If we happen to have some slack on our team in terms of time, we may do some manual testing, but that's not guaranteed. It's a best effort. And then on the far end, it was, you're going to get the output of the scanners, and we really think that's awful for you, but we can't do better because we just don't have the bandwidth. And we ended up going in 2 years from 44 assessments to 400 assessments. And I think, there was 2 things that happened that made that happen so quickly. One was, we normalized things. When we said it's a critical app, everybody on the team knew, it gets check marks and this and this and this. There were no questions. We understood how to scope it. It was all just known. It used to be, app shows up, we have to argue about what it needs to be tested. How do we test it? We just normalized all that. We made nice, easy streams. And then a lot of the work I did with another fellow, Adam, was to make automation around the slow and painful portions of the testing, right? So the automation plus normalization got us that crazy. It was almost, I'd love to be able to say it was a 10x improvement, because that's the .io hipster thing to say, but unfortunately it was a 9.4, so I fell short. But yeah, that was really it. Normalizing what we did and just like literally saying out, these are the buckets that we're going to put you in, And we knew that none of this was precise and not really even scientific, but it was better. Like an expression I've used before is like a random stick you pull out of your yard that you measure everything against is better than not measuring against anything, right? It may not be a proper yardstick, but it's something. And if I have
I'm going to
something,
use that.
yeah, I mean it's vital, because so many people get wrapped up in like, we have to have this super precise decision of what critical is this, if it has this but not that. No, just like throw up a measurement. I did this at TEA. We had this cross-cutting vulnerability that went across all of the apps, and we had to remediate them on the app side. So you have this like awful vulnerability that has to get remediated like 120 odd times. So I made this big spreadsheet of what I called the fear factor, because that was the popular TV show at the time. And I just said, does it have only employee or external? Does it have this? And I gave them weights straight out of my backside, and I calculated a number, and that was the order we did the remediation in. Was it perfect? Oh, heck no. But did it give me a pecking order to start working the list? Yep. And it was probably, 70, 80% right. And if it was wrong in a few cases, who cares? We got it done.
Mm-hmm. That was awesome. And I like that there was it's like a happy outcome. It's good. I want to hear.
Pearson was so happy they had me go talk about it. That's why I can drop their name publicly. They were like, we want to look awesome to the this our constituency. Go out and talk at OWASP conferences and tell the story of how you did this. So I did.
I actually sent your AppSec Cali talk where you showed off your pipeline to a client just the other, like literally, I think yesterday or the day before. I was like, okay, so there's this guy named Matt.
Awesome.
There is just a comment in the chat at Matt. So there's also the idea of securing value streams, although I haven't seen that in practice, but it comes up in agile literature.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. That's a little bit tricky, because a lot of times the domain of the product or app team isn't as broad as a value stream would be. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where you'd run into issues. You'd have to have it done at a more programmatic layer, like at RAC. If the product org that made all of RAC's cloud bought into a value stream, then I could mirror that. But I don't think I would have had the cachet to get that deep into the product creation from the AppSec perspective. I'm riding on the ride rather than driving the ride, or driving the bus, or my analogy is falling apart right now, but you get the idea.
Yeah. and that generally shows that somehow Agile's fallen apart, because they have just pulled apart a value stream from product, because product is supposed to be aligned with that value stream. That's how it's supposed to work, right? But it is possible you have sub products that have sub product owners, and hopefully they are driving towards the same value stream, but that doesn't always work. And you can't do AppSec here for this thing up here.
You're kind of too far down the hierarchy to make influences to be able to actually get that done. Yeah. At least not directly. You can drop hints in meetings or something, but you're not going to mandate it.
So I want to hear Grant's success story. Is that okay?
Sure.
Like any story where, there was a thing you wanted to try to do, and then you did it, and it was like, yeah, that actually worked out really nicely. If you don't have one handy, it's okay.
So there are a lot of those. Fortunately, I've been very fortunate that there've been a lot of success stories. But I think probably the one I want to talk about, and it's primarily because I'm working very heavily on the Cornucopia project right now, is a Cornucopia adoption. So Cornucopia, as a project within OWASP, focuses on developers doing threat modeling as part of their normal delivery cycle. And the reason it's complicated is because developers don't do threat modeling. That's not a thing developers do out of themselves. That isn't something that they consider to be part of their remit. I was working with an organization. It was before I went freelance. I was actually full-time employed with them. I'll mention them here because they actually contributed back to the project. So I was working for RBI, Read Business Information. They do a lot with a lot of different companies. They have also been part of a lot of talks I've given on Cornucopia. So if you want to learn more about what they've done and who they are, go look those up. But essentially, RBI decided they were going to roll out Cornucopia is a thing that all dev teams should do. And there are thousands of dev teams within the organization. I mean, literally, there are thousands of dev teams. I couldn't go to every single dev team across Western Europe, let alone all of everything that was happening in Asia and everything that was happening in Africa and everything that was happening in the United States, although they did send me out to do a couple of things around the different areas. But what they did do is they sent me to do this with as many people as I could. And I put together an email, and I have a copy of it here because, Tanya, how many emails have you written that ended up getting bound like that?
Not any that I can recall.
So I wrote an email, and I mean, I'm going to flash this, and there's a whole bunch of PII on here. So I'm going to apologize to everybody who's involved because it was an email with everything, but I'm sure they won't mind too much. But so essentially I sent an email, and you can see it's an email. Okay. It is an email that probably shouldn't have been 3 pages, but it ended up being 3 pages because I was writing a bunch of stuff about things that I cared about to explain how to play this game to teams. And I attached a bunch of attachments, and those attachments included things, and that's why this document is so big. Those attachments included things like the ASVS, like App Sensor, like the actual score sheet for Cornucopia. But I sent the email with the attachments, and they printed it out and they bound it, and they were like, okay, this is now our Bible for how we're going to do this thing. And you can see there's ASVS, and it shows you how long ago this was, because that's version 2, right, of ASVS, 2014. Now RBI in the markets where they're involved with finance do threat modeling with Cornucopia as a regular part of their business activities. And that means that teams play the game every 2 weeks as part of their sprint cycles, which is great because it means that they're thinking about security as part of the stories they're scrubbing for the next sprint, right? I'm going to write code for the next 2 weeks. Where can that go wrong? And where should I be thinking about things that I could put in place, either non-functional requirements for the story or new stories that need to be added to the sprint cycle because I'm doing this thing. And Gabriela, who wrote this or who printed this out and bound it and gave it to me, is one of the Scrum Masters in one of the markets in the Netherlands, because I had actually traveled to the Netherlands to go and teach them. And I didn't realize that half the team wasn't there, like stupidly. So I couldn't play a card game because Cornucopia is this deck of cards that I showed you earlier. I couldn't play a card game with them. So she asked me to put it in writing. And then when I put it in writing, she arranged for a remote session. And then I had to show everyone their cards, and we had to try and figure a way to play this remotely. Because obviously this is not something you want to try and consume as a dev team. Like no dev team's going to read through this. I didn't read through this, and I helped write part of this. But playing a game, that's easy, that's fun. And now that game is a thing they do all the time. We managed to get, I don't know how many decks printed, and I don't even have any of them with me. I'm sure somewhere I have a deck of cards, and the Cornucopia deck has on the back like a blank space that companies can put their logo on. And RBI actually printed, I don't know how many thousands of these decks and sent them around the world to send to different teams with the RBI logo on the back of them, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And now Toby, my current business partner, has actually put together a digital version of the game. So at some point, I'll share that with you, Tanya, and you can share it out there. It's very much in beta. Wow. We're still breaking it with people, but there is a digital version of Cornucopia, much like there's a digital version of EOP now, which teams can play. It's free to use, and it's cool.
Elevation of privilege?
So Elevation of Privilege, there's a free version. It's been out there for a while. We've now created a cornucopia version of that with actual cards you play.
Cool. You just use the acronym, and not everyone knows what the acronym means.
Very true. Thank you. Elevation of Privilege, the Microsoft /Showstack /OWASP game. Yeah. And yeah,
Cool.
so the win is RBI is using it, and lots of other companies are now using it too, because they've seen that there's a knock-on effect. Thinking about security before you write code means your code's better.
Yeah, and your design's better, right?
Exactly.
Grant, would you be interested in like setting up like an online game of Cornucopia with the We Hack Purple community members? I'm sure that like we have like over 300 members. I'm sure that we could get a whole bunch of us to show up and like play with you.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's something that I do fairly regularly with Agile Stationery.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if you know Agile Stationery. They make like they've taken a bunch of the open source projects. So they've taken this boring deck that Colin and I created, and they've turned it into something shiny and new and big, and that matches the same size as the EOP, Elevation of Privilege deck.
Okay.
But they do a regular, I think once a month there's a session where they play. But I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to set something up, Tanya. So let me know. I'm keen to do it.
Yeah, that would be super fun.
Pick a project. Let's talk about it.
Okay. Ooh, I like this. So I was thinking at this point, since, we're like an hour and a half in, that we could go to the questions at the back of the book. And so I'm going to put up the first question. And so we don't all have to answer each question. Like if you want, we could split them up, whichever way you want to. But like I wrote the book, and so I gave my opinion for 225 pages. But I want to hear your opinions too, and I want to hear the audience's opinion. So if you have comments or questions to add, please do. But there are 11 questions. And so the first question is, give one reason why maintaining an up-to-date application inventory is valuable for any org. And since I already told a story about then how it helped us respond to an incident, I feel like my opinion or answer is already there. Do either one of you want to give a reason why an app inventory is helpful?
Well, certainly, if nothing else, it can give you an idea of the scope of the work that you have to do, right? Because that's always a question. Like the throughput of your team is usually one of the big things that stops you from doing more, right? I can only push so much water through this pipe. And if you know how much water you have to drain, you have an idea of what size of pipe you need. Right. So inventory will give you that, where you have a reasonable, and somewhat trustworthy count of the potential work. And then you can start dividing that work with a little bit of intelligence instead of just, throwing up the "we'll test your app" sign and waiting for people to stop by and get their app tested. Right. So inventories in that regard, I think, are tremendously useful.
Cool. I agree so much.
So if anything else, it's a to-do list. Right, these are the things that still need to be done. Yep. Tick them off as you go through them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We like to help teams organizations build a license to operate, which allows teams to push code to production through their process rapidly. But we need to have an inventory of things that we need to get through that process, right? So we need somewhere to start from.
We have some answers in the chat too. So Ben was saying it helps us test smarter as opposed to working harder.
Yep.
And then G. Voden says, I suppose the idea is to secure a set of activities or tech that deliver value to the business, which I feel is potentially part of like a conversation from earlier, but that's cool. So I have another question. Give an example of an alert that your application could give. So in this chapter, so we didn't talk about it earlier, but in this chapter we talk about, or I talk about like logging and monitoring and having your app give alerts. And so an example of an alert that I could have an app give is, someone tried to log in 100 times in under a minute. And I think this might be a bot. You should check it out. So that's like an alert that your app could give. It could log, and then it's like they've unsuccessfully tried to log in 100 times. Someone should know about this, right? And it could just be like an email that goes to someone on the dev team. It could be an alert sent to a SIM. It could be, I don't know, lots of things, right? But what else could an app maybe give an alert about, like a security related sort of alert?
Ooh, that's a good one.
So I'll go first then. In this case, might give you a second to think.
And you don't have to answer each one either.
So the 5 suits, and there's 6, but the 5 suits in cornucopia that matter are the areas where I'd like to see logging, right? So if it's hitting auth C or auth Z, if it's hitting sessions in some way, it's dealing with crypto in some way, and if it's dealing with either data validation or output encoding, somewhere like that, those areas, I'd like to see things hit some kind of logging, some kind of monitored logging. And Tanya, I think you know V, very heavily involved in the logging and monitoring. She's keen on this, right? She's like really hectic on how logging should lead. If we're concerned about, if we think about the things we're concerned about from a security perspective, there should be logs for it. And now her initial trigger there was forensics, but it's true, right? If we're concerned about it from a security point of view, we should know about it in the logs, because we probably should be told about it while it's happening, and we should probably be able to respond to it in real time. And even if all that fails, at least we want to know it happened so we can figure out what happened. So there's a lot. But in any one of those 5, if it's authorization, authentication, if it's session management stuff, if it's cryptography, or if it happens to do with data validation or input encoding, I want to know all about that. So those things should be in the logs.
I feel like Grant answered everything ever.
Well, there's some stuff that isn't. You're reminding me, though, your answer reminded me of an older OWASP project, and to be honest with you, I haven't looked at it in quite some time, but Michael Coates created App Sensor a long time ago, and that is a really great guide for this kind of thing. And I'm struggling to remember the specifics of that. I just know it's super useful. But I also would double down on what Grant said, is that there's certain, I always used to call them the spooky parts of a threat model, right? That are the interesting things. That that's like an adjunct to this. One of the things that's interesting from a threat model perspective is, as a tester now, I know the interesting parts to go poke at. And so those pieces are the pieces that you would want more logging of. And it's particularly great if the app logs, because the app knows what unexpected is much more than any outside logging something. So I think that's a fundamental piece of it, is that as a developer, if you're looking at this and going, oh, I should never have a -1 come in here. Well, you should bloody well log that if it does happen, because a -1 should never come in there. You're right. Like, total count of, I don't know, bicycles you own, -1. What the heck? Like, that's not right. Well, in fact, I was a manager at RAC, and I had to do this HR training where we had to learn on the training system, and I could give my employees negative bonuses. Like, why did the HR app let me give negative bonuses? And I, of course, I raised my hand and asked the instructor, and they were like, what? And the guy next to me was like, dude, I don't want to work for you. But
you're like, you owe us money. You really stink.
Like, you were so bad that we're not going to fire you. You're going to pay us this month.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Sorry.
No, that just those kind of things are things that are app specific, kind of business logic-y, context-y, important things that a WAF knows that ints flow into this thing, but does a uint need to only flow, or an int? Like, is it negative ever? That's really hard to tell from the outside, but inside the app, as a developer writing that, yeah, you can know. And obviously the whoever it was that wrote that HR thing never thought, who would put a negative number here? Well, I did, because I could, and it was kind of fun.
So V's approach to the monitoring project is exactly that, right? It's definitely dev centric, and it's because devs know what should be logged, and they should be logging things around security, but they know when things are wacky, and wacky generally is a security thing for us as well, right?
Yep.
Negative one might mean nothing from a security perspective, but it could mean everything, right? It could be a way in which to create some way for the application just to crash in an interesting way that allows me access to systems I shouldn't.
Yes. Okay, I have more questions. So this might be a trick question, but I find that constantly everyone seems to think testing is the only important part of an application security program. And so is testing the most important part of an AppSec program? If so, why? And if not, why not? And I actually had to go back and read my answer because I didn't remember exactly, because I feel it's very important, but I don't feel it's the most important. What do you two think?
Well, I'm gonna answer that it is the most important, even though I honestly don't feel that way. But I'm going to tell you why it may be most important. That's maybe a better way to phrase this. Particularly if you're starting new and you have to pick a thing to do, testing is kind of the things people expect security people to do. So it may be an easy sell. And it can drive decisions, whereas if you keep finding SQL injection across your apps, that can drive a conversation of, hey, let's get some training on injection problems, right? So testing can be a great facilitator to move into those other areas that are also, quite honestly, very crucial. If I had to pick one, I mean, I am a tester at heart, so I probably would pick that one, but that's probably my own personal biases because I like breaking things. But it can be an important part, but it is by far not the only part. And I think, excluding the case of you're trying to start from ground zero, and maybe that's the only thing you can politically sell at your organization, outside of that kind of corner case, it shouldn't be the only part of your AppSec program.
Grant? You're just like, yes.
No, so I totally understand that. And I mean, my entire career was built on testing, and I made most of my money, the house I live in, that came from that. But is testing the most important part of your university degree? Is the test you did in high school the most important part of your high school diploma? The answer is no. All the learning you had to do to be able to pass the test were more important. But the tests just prove that you've done it. So no, they're not the most important. The most important is doing the things that get you to the point where you can pass the tests. But unless you test, you don't know that you've passed the test. So
yes, it's like verification that all your work worked, and it catches anything you've missed.
Yeah.
But I feel like, honestly, I feel it's getting devs to buy in. For me, like whatever it is I'm trying to do, like if they won't buy into me doing testing, like I've had devs make it impossible for me to test.
Oh yeah.
They're just like, I'm just going to fish around on you and move everything about and just, there's no schedule time, Tanya. We're just, we can't spare a moment. But like, if I don't have buy-in, if I don't have any cooperation, like I'm dead in the water. Like I can't do the things. So we have a bunch of opinions in the audience that are really helpful. So Ben says, secure architecture is the most important. Mohan says, yes, because testing is the most important. You should start from right to left in the system development lifecycle for improving things. I feel like I see all of the opinions, and like testing's really important. I just don't think it's necessarily more important than the other parts. Because if you do, so I became a pen tester because that's the only job I thought that there was. I thought I had to do the firewalls, I had to do risk or governance, or I could be a pen tester. I'm like, well, which one sounds like the most fun to me as someone who was a dev for like 17 years? I'm like, yeah, I want a pen test. I want to smash. And then I discovered that I could do AppSec. And so like, I could do all the things to make sure that they pass that test. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, yes, that's the part that interests me the most. So maybe it's my bias that I don't think testing's the most important part, because I find the other parts more fun.
Well, and there's a lot more value add in what happens with the output of a test than the test itself, right? My indelicate way of saying this at RAC was, we have found a crap sandwich and we need to understand how to garnish that to make it palatable, right? Like, we have this problem, it's ugly, and we got to solve it in a business-friendly way, right? How do you garnish that to make it work, right?
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter. Well, it does work at that. That or chocolate probably solves a lifetime of problems.
Or deep frying, one of the three.
Deep frying is also a very good choice.
Okay, I have another question, and I think that both of you might like it. Is it more valuable to buy a RASP or a WAF tool, so like a shield for your application, or to spend that money on ensuring your code is secure? Explain your choice. So who wants to rant about that?
Oh boy.
Because I got opinions.
Fundamentally, you're sort of asking, do you want to happen outside of the true context of a running program or inside of the true context? And RASP is a little bit inside, I guess, too. But the things that I don't like about the shieldy type solutions, excluding visibility. Visibility is super useful for those kind of shieldy things, but I don't like the shieldy things because you end up having an incentive structure of, gee, well, if we have that vulnerability, we'll fix it sometime. We're gonna WAF. It'll buy us some time while we spend a year to solve the SQL injection on our login page. Not that that was ever part of my life. Cough, cough. So, like, those kind of things I don't like the disincentive. Like, to me, the fundamental problem is you have problems in your code. What are you going to solve? You fix the code. Like, I like the visibility of the RASP, WAF, and other kind of outside products. And RASP is kind of inside product, I guess. But anyway, I like those, but I don't like the sort of subtle hidden message in those of, yeah, don't worry about fixing the stuff. We got this magic sauce that makes it better. Like that's where I have a problem. Although, like I said, the visibility side of those tools are super useful, right? Because you can do things with the WAF to say, oh, look, real attackers are actually sending us or 1=1 all the time. We got to watch out for SQL injection, right? That's useful. Is that like, does it solve code? No. So, yeah, here's another statement about observability, and I would double down on that absolutely, because that's really where those, for lack of a better terms, those shieldy products play a role. But that's a very mature thing. I'd rather, I mean, if I had no tool, would I pick a WAF or a RASP before I'd pick a SAST or a like a OS IAST? IAST, yeah, something like that. I like. And honestly, most places have tools that they're not fully using either. So adding another tool that you use at 10% of its functionality really doesn't move the ball forward. You do better to burn cycles on making your existing tools work better. I kicked that around a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say stuff that's going to get me in trouble tomorrow, but that's because it is 10 p.m. here and I finished my drink. WAF, odds are, is completely useless in your organization because you probably have it on in monitor mode only, and nobody is watching the scene at like 3 a.m. when it finally gets through, right? We'll find about it tomorrow and we'll deal with the chaos tomorrow, but it's already happened then. So WAF, RASP, yeah, great, fantastic. But if RASP is working in your organization, I'm probably not terribly worried about your AppSec program, right? You're probably, firstly, you're doing a load of testing. You're doing the right things from a functional point of view, because otherwise IAST wouldn't work. And if IAST doesn't work, you're not getting RASP to work properly. So if you're running RASP in your environment, then you are an organization that probably doesn't need my help and you're probably sorted. Assuming RASP is actually running in your environment, right? Because it means that you're doing all the things right up to that point. You're doing all the dev stuff that's right. You're doing testing with IAST, and you have the capacity to run RASP in production. Great, fantastic. Anybody who's doing that, well done. Come talk to me about how you managed to get to that point, because I want to get my customers, my clients to that point too. spend the
I feel
damn
like you want
money
to say
in the
more.
right area. Just to spend their money in the right area. Help your devs to learn what they should be doing. Send them on a course. Help them to buy them the right tools by all means. But RASP is not buying dev tools. That doesn't help devs at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So I agree with both of you. I want to add that. So I feel like if you're going to spend a crap ton of money on something, that if you spend it on making sure that your devs are writing secure code, whether that be via like training them and doing threat modeling with them, or lots of pen testing because you want to spend more money, apparently, lots of pen testing and fixing the bugs later if you like doing the delayed slowdown, more expensive approach. But I do feel that like WAFs and RASPs are useful, for instance. So like one of the companies that I was working with that bought that one company. So they bought 6 companies in 1 year. And one of them, their app was just I called it our little dumpster fire. And I was like, I'm not okay with this going on our network until it's got a WAF in front of it and network segmentation around it. So I want to have a moat. And I don't mean a moat so that other things can't get in. I mean, I'm like, so crap from that app can't get out into our nice network that is so pristine and beautiful. We work so hard on it. And I thought that was good. I was like, RASP or WAF, your thing. And then we're going to have, it's like a Band-Aid for now while we fix what's wrong with it and bring them up to our standards that we're comfortable with. I'm like, or you can put it on the network and then I'm going to complain about it a lot in all of our meetings. And they're like, wow, serious consequences, Tanya. Or if your thing is mission critical. So like, let's say you have a secure system development lifecycle, you're doing lots of testing and you're passing the tests, like you're fixing the bugs, you're passing the test, like your app looks really solid, but it is your baby. It is the thing that absolutely must always function. And so perhaps you would spend like money on DDoS protection and a RASP to make sure it is literally like as bulletproof as an application can be because you have severe risks. Do you know what I mean? Like, for instance, like let's say, so I tweeted earlier this morning that I voted. So I voted by mail. So Canada's having an election right now because we couldn't wait until the proper date when we were supposed to have our election. They felt the need to call it a few weeks early. But anyway, Canadian politics, much ruckus. But like I ran the security for the election in 2015. I was the CISO for that. And there's like a lot of things that lead up to it. And it's important for Canada. This is a big deal. And so we got DDoS protection and a whole bunch of other things for the critical things to run the election because it's that important to our country, right? Now, for our other apps that do other things, I'm like, yeah, I don't give a crap, right? Like they're cool. We tested them. We did our secure SDLC. They're looking good. It's fine, right? But for the thing that you need for that specific 36 days in our case, it's like, no, it's nothing. We have to have the best. Right? So I feel like it's an additional layer, but never instead of secure coding. Yeah, I have strong feelings. Sorry.
No, I share them. I really do. Like, I used to add WAF requirements to everything as a security architect, purely because I wanted people to understand that WAFs fundamentally need, and they have to turn them on, right? And if you can't turn a WAF on because you're not confident with how you've tuned it, it doesn't do anything. So there's no point. And it was just to see how far I could push licensing boundaries, mostly. WAFs have gotten better. Mohan's right. They are better nowadays, but still.
Yeah, one interesting thing about WAFs that I kind of learned for a while, I was doing the IT stuff for OWASP when we still ran our own wiki and didn't do the much better GitHub-y thing we're doing now. I mean, this is known. If you dig around on the internet, you'll see Signal Sciences donated their WAF, next generation WAF, kill bad traffic thing. It got named like 12 different things. I don't know what you call it. But they donated to OWASP the ability to run their Signal Sciences agent in the Apache module in our case on our server. So hey, sure, we set that up. And if nothing else, the WAF reduced what I would call the background radiation of just crap traffic on the internet. So much so, I went to a smaller VM in our cloud provider because our literally our CPU and RAM usage went down enough that I could downscale the VM.
Wow.
That's
and
cool.
So that's a value. Is that product or app security? Not really, but it had a value. But I knew what that value was. Like, and unfortunately, like a lot of these are dinguses who are, no offense to dinguses, but dinguses who are going out and getting, one of our OWASP tools, and then what do I run it at? Well, I'll run it at OWASP.org, right? Why not? Right? So you'd see these like our own tool banners hitting our own site because I guess I'm assuming people are just trying to experiment and they don't know where to point it at, so they point it at OWASP. So like a lot of that background radiation just went away, which was fantastic. Now I guess we gave it to GitHub, and they can sure handle it. So, but yeah, that was an interesting facet of WAFs that had nothing to do really with the product security or virtual patching. It strictly just stopped the stupid traffic that you get when you put something on a public IP.
To be fair,
so everyone that's listening, do not put your scanners at OWASP.com. Put it at brokencrystals.com. You have permission. Right? You have permission to do it. Do not harass the OWASP people. They're nice. Stop that. Okay, sorry, please, Grant, continue.
Is brokencrystals.com on the intentionally vulnerable web applications list?
Yes.
Excellent.
Oh, I don't know if it's on the list or not, actually. I have to check if it's on the list because we just whipped it up recently.
At the end of this call, I'm going to check, and if it isn't there, I'm going to add it for you, Tanya, because it definitely should be there.
Thank you.
It is. Yeah. So yeah, the WAF hitting or the protection for OWASP for WAF. Fortunately, that's now Microsoft's problem, which I feel strangely comfortable with.
Yep.
Okay, I have another question for y'all, and it's describe a type of security incident that would require the assistance of a software developer. What would we need from them? Because like sometimes apps have security incidents, right? And I feel like any of the OWASP top 10 is a good example. But yeah, does anyone want to give an example? Or I will, because I made the question for a reason, because that has been my life.
What do you mean sometimes, Tanya? Like very rarely a developer doesn't have to get involved in a security incident. Very rarely, like 30%, according to NIST's review, right, of CVEs. So yeah, regularly, almost always, it's an application that's caused the problem or caused the initial thing, and then trying to debug what led to that to figure out what needs to be fixed. All that's going to require the developer's involvement. Yeah. So almost always.
Yeah, short of a hardware failure, I'm not sure what wouldn't be. You know what I mean? Unless somebody pulled the power out of the server rack, or some, that kind of like tripped over the cable kind of an issue.
Configuration in S3, maybe.
Yeah.
That's like the exception, maybe.
You know what's crazy though is that I give like secure coding training, and then I'll tell them, oh yeah, and then I have like an hour of the day, and I can squish it to 30 minutes if you want, for devs about incident response and like what they need to know. Like for instance, what need to know is, you better not leave the premises without telling us, or give us your phone number or something partway through an incident. Like, don't tell your friends what we've been talking about. Yeah. Like, and then a lot of them are like, oh, they don't need to know that. And I'm like, what? And then they're like, we've never had an app incident. I'm like, oh, sweetie, yes, you have. You just don't know.
I can't think of an incident that we handled at Rack or Rackspace that didn't have a good chunk of the dev team of that particular cloud product that had the issue. Like, I honestly cannot think of one. Like, they were always there. Like, we were there, product security was there, QA was there, the product teams, the dev part of the product teams were there, and then the infrastructure team was there. Although in a lot of cases, infrastructure worked in the product group. So like the cloud servers team had devs and infrastructure people. So yeah, they were always there.
I can think of one. Oh, one case where it wouldn't be necessary. One case where it wasn't necessary. This was an on-premise data center in The Hague I'm not going to mention the organization. Needless to say, they're not Dutch, but they're in The Hague. And you required a change ID, change request number, and a valid time slot for the change to get into the data center to do any work. And you went through like this 3-phase doorway to get into the data center and into the rack where you needed to be. And then you looked sort of like this bright light coming from the back of the data center. And it was because the delivery doors were propped open because the guys who worked in the data center were standing outside smoking. That's probably the only security incident that we haven't pulled devs into.
That's a fair one.
Yeah. Okay, so we all agree, and I like it when that happens. Okay, so the next question, and I know that you're all like, we're probably all going to answer the same thing. But if you could give a software developer just one tool to help them, what would it be and why? Why would you pick that tool?
Oh, interesting.
Like it's hard.
Are you being very generic with tool here, or do you mean like a software tool or a
anything you want? Anything that you want that you could give software developers any tool, but to help them with security. Sorry, because if you're going to give them any tool, you'd give them an IDE, right? Because a software developer with no IDE is like sitting there and text edit, being unhappy. Yeah. I have programmed in Notepad a lot of times.
Oh, I still program in VI, but that's just me.
Right?
Sucker for punishment.
I know. I love it. Oh, I'm so hooked. But I have like keystroke memory. But anyway, that's irrelevant. The one tool that I've had great success in the past with, and this a little bit depends on the type of dev the team is doing, but if you're doing any kind of internet-y HTTP traffic generating work, I found a local proxy, like Zap, to be tremendously useful, because I'm surprised at how many developers haven't had a background in understanding, I make this HTTP call in my code and it goes off to something and something comes back, and they maybe see the memory representation of it in their software, but they don't understand the wire side of it. And seeing the wire side of it, and more importantly, seeing that you can fiddle with the wire side of it, has lit up a lot of light bulbs when I've done developer training, where they're like, I can remember one classic case of an app where there was a ascend descend button, and that ended up affecting a SQL statement. Well, you could inject SQL into that ascend descend button, but only with the proxy, because I told the developer, well, I can change that value and this happens. He goes, you can't change that. I'm like, I changed it. And he's like, no, you can't.
Go.
You can't change it in a browser. And I was like, come here. I want to show you this thing called the local proxy. And then I showed him. He was like,
say that to a hacker. You can't do that.
That is the worst thing to say. But it was hilarious because he lit up. He went, oh, man. Like, yes, like the browser doesn't have to be the thing that talks to your web app. Heck, it could be Telnet if you're really bored and want to do it, or Netcat, or that's really crunchy and annoying to do, but you can do it, right? So,
what's the? I'm in Siberia and all I have is a Telnet client. You remember those days?
Yep.
So Tanya, if it's a software tool, I'd like to see something doing some kind of interactive code analysis, right? So IAST is the tool I'd prefer. Mainly because it does two things. It forces devs to write decent testing, so unit and functional testing, and two, because it shows you actual vulnerabilities without any question. But I think the real tool, the tool that probably is the one that you're going to talk about, so I won't steal the thunder too much, is the knowledge. They should know what to look for. They should know what good looks like and what bad looks like. And so that knowledge is the tool they should have, right? They should be able to become security specialists in the way that they are scalability specialists or reliability specialists within development, right? That's the thing I'd want to give them, those skills.
Well, that's actually in the next question, Grant. So you're ahead of your time.
I also think, honestly, like just for me personally, I use this Go meta that's a Golang. It basically wires up a ton of linters together and runs them against your Go code. Like even linters are fantastic. Like, and
Well,
that's a simple tool that you can hand to a developer, assuming the language has them and they're functional. But yeah, I lint all my stuff. It's fantastic.
Linting is the base for SAST, right? It doesn't require understanding how the code's going to execute. It just looks at how the code's written and goes, "That's wrong." It's basically the spell check.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I explain it.
Check.
It's like the grammar police for your code. It's like, sorry, that's poetic license, and we don't allow that around here,
Exactly.
mister. Honestly, if I was going to give them a tool, like a software-related tool, so the next one we're going to talk about some knowledge, but I would say that DAST is the easiest to use. Does that make sense? Like it's the fastest to learn, and it will have some false positives potentially, but it's like I don't know how to say it, but it's fun, right? Like it is really fun. The first time you power up a DAST, you're like, I'm a hacker. And it makes you feel successful, and it tells you some stuff that's wrong. And I have given Zap, like OWASP Zap or OWASP Z attack proxy, to lots and lots of devs. And within 30 minutes, I can have a room full of, a bunch of university students scanning all the things and finding bugs and being like, holy crap, right? And then showing them this is how you could proxy stuff, like Matt was saying. I think a SaaS tool, SCA, all of them are really good. But for a dev, for me, it immediately clicked. I was like, oh no.
Yep.
This thing that no college professor told you, by the way, someone's going to intercept and fiddle with your traffic. It is suddenly made real.
I know, they never told us that. Well, I mean, I graduated in 2000, so there's a lot of things we didn't know back then.
I graduated with Netscape, so quiet you.
Yeah. So this,
I'm older than both of you, but I only graduated recently, so quite both of you. finally went back to school and finished a degree.
Oh, well,
Awesome.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So the next question is, if you could give developers one learning resource, what would it be? And obviously, I would be giving them Alice and Bob Learn Application Security, and then all the courses from wehackpurple.com. I made them because I was like, why does this crap not exist? But I want you to answer things that aren't We Hack Purple and aren't Alice and Bob Learn, because I want to give more value, right? And just not toot my own horn. So what other resources, learning resources, would you want to give? Like an OWASP membership.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad. I was thinking, actually, the first thing that popped into my head was Juice Shop has that book that accompanies Juice Shop. That would be a very useful exercise, because when I've had people ask me, how do I learn? I don't know, just me, I like to have it interactive, and the interactivity of reading about hacks and then doing them on Juice Shop would be a fantastic learning tool.
I'm just going to put that in the chat so that everyone can see the link. The link for those who are listening, because we release this as listening only, it's leanpub.com/juice-shop. Or just Google OWASP Juice Shop book, and it'll come right up. What else? There's a lot of awesome SaaS stuff coming out of OWASP that,
so you don't actually need an OWASP membership to get all the stuff, because we're awesome at OWASP and we give it all away for free. Get a membership because you're helping us. But you don't need to have a membership. And if the only thing you were to take away as a one learning resource, I would say it's the cheat sheets, right? The cheat sheets are the number one quick entry into what OWASP does and how you can get through things. And combine that maybe with both the OWASP Top 10, the original OWASP Top 10, along with the Top 10. What's the controls? The
ASVS.
ASVS.
So I love the ASVS. I love, but this is just the
proactive controls.
Proactive,
yes. Yeah, Manico's baby. Yep.
So Maniko
Yeah.
and
And Katie Anton.
Katie, yeah.
Hey, Anton. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, she's awesome. Both of them.
They're going to be doing a new version, at least if I can poke them hard enough, to map with the new version of the OWASP Top 10 this year. Obviously, Andrew and his team have had much more time to create the new OWASP Top 10, but hopefully Jim and Katie will get the proactive controls, because the proactive controls are pretty generic. Those and the cheat sheets. Those will be the two.
Okay, I just like tried to copy the link and then it gave me a bunch of Google crap. So just a second. Here.
All of the Google
There we
stuff.
go. Yeah, all the crap. There we go. OWASP Proactive Controls Project. Yeah, I really like that project. I wish, maybe this is selfish, but I wish that the Proactive Controls Project was as famous as the OWASP Top 10 project, because it's so good, and why aren't we all about it?
Well,
I don't know.
It's literally the same problem that we have with threat modeling versus what we're doing with cornucopia, right? It's the attack side is cooler. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want a red jacket and look cool, right? I mean,
I look good in red. Look at Matt. He looks good in red.
Yeah, he does. He does. And I'm not wearing my goon shirt tonight, but it would be red as well.
Right.
But purple's better. It really is.
I do wear a lot of purple, and I had a She-Hack purple shirt made.
I see. Yep.
I'm super proud of my cute T-shirt. My stepkids are just like, "Why do you wear shirts of yourself?" I'm like, "Cause I'm a dweeb." Thank you.
see, it would be less awkward for me to have a shirt like that, because I can wear you on my shirt all day. That's not a problem.
Okay, sorry.
A shirt with me?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We could reverse our shirt. We switch.
There you go.
So the next two questions are sort of just for some clarification. So if people are listening and they're new to software and security of software, so do either one of you want to differentiate what SAST versus SCA is? Because people get this confused a lot. Or I'll do it if you want.
SCA is an awesome idea and an awesome concept, but it's about what pieces you've used from other people who've written code into your code. Mm-hmm. So it's third-party libraries, DLLs, other binaries you're making use of. Whereas SAST is about static analysis, literally reading the source code of your own written code. Then SAST is kind of a linter in that aspect, but it can also try and elevate linting to what it would look like at runtime, because SAST tries to do runtime stuff. But SAST is your code, SCA is the other code you didn't write, but you take responsibility for because you included it in your code.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I could not have worded that more perfectly.
Yep. Your free code that is free as in puppy.
Yeah, free as in puppy. You still clean up after it.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
I saw this guy at Loco Moco do a talk, and it was called Open Source Software 1000 Free Puppies. It's that's the best talk title of all time.
Yep. And it's so true, because it's beautiful and you love it, but guess what? There's care and feeding, right? Everybody loves to hold the cute puppy, but you do have to care and feed the thing, right? It's just part of the responsibility of taking in that code for free.
Somebody walks around with a little bag.
Yes. And Ben adds SCA is very, very quick. It's very fast, and the accuracy level I find is very high because you are or are not using that open source library, and it's known to be vulnerable or it's not. It doesn't mean that your app is vulnerable, but no.
Yeah, so that's exactly the boundary, right? You are or are not using the vulnerable library doesn't mean your app is vulnerable. And I have a lot of devs will quibble a lot on that point. Are they using an executable path of the code that is vulnerable or not? And a lot of SCA, dependency checker is a great tool, but it won't tell you if the library you've included if the module or the function in the library that's vulnerable that you've included is actually being used.
And sometimes, Grant, you're not using that part, but your app is still vulnerable, aka anything to do with Java struts and that ONLG language.
Yeah.
I know I said it wrong, but it made my life hell for all of 2016. And I dislike struts based on principle and lack of sleep now.
If anyone in the security industry still likes struts, please email me and I'll explain to you why you're wrong.
And the fast comment, by the way, is dead on, because I did automation when I was at Duo Security of a OC or SCA tool, and I did 36 repos in 3 minutes. I mean,
that's amazing.
It was fast enough that we just tied it to a commit to master hook. Like we were thinking we were going to schedule it every day or every week or something like that. And we were like, oh, this is so fast. We'll just do it at every commit. Like, who cares?
Mm-hmm. So what is the difference between SAST, static application security testing, and DAST, then dynamic application security testing? Does anyone want to handle that one?
It's a softball. I'll go for it. Sure. So SAST is looking at the not running code, and DAST is looking at the running code. So how does my application look like if I just looked at the repo, and how does my application look like if I looked at the deployed out to wherever you're deploying the thing? That's really the fundamental difference. Like code that's sitting around, static, right? Or code that is like moving or dynamic. That's the way to think about it.
So perfect, because I speak with clients sometimes, and they're like, "Yeah, we did a SAST scan on it, and then they did." No, it was DAST or it was SCA, and they get them confused because the acronyms, but the difference is super duper important.
Yeah. Well, one of them has no context of how it runs. It has to make that up, but it knows exactly what you wrote. The other has all the context of running, but doesn't know what the code actually says. So, yeah, ups and downs on both sides.
Yeah. Great point about context, too. That's a fantastic point.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 3 questions left, and all of these questions are going to need you 11 people watching to interact with us, because these are questions for you. So I want you to set a potential goal that you would have for your AppSec program, or something you would want to do, like where you work, or if you're currently in school or you're considering moving into security someday, or even if you're just like along for the ride and having fun with me and Matt and Grant. Like, what type of goal would you want to set? Because we talked about all sorts of things we could do. And so I'm hoping that people in the chat will share with us what type of goal, and then like, why did you choose it? And in it, I even dig in further, like, how will you measure your progress? But this is like a homework assignment. But just what types of things would you like to try to do where you're working? And then me and Matt and Grant can share on that. So think about that and put some stuff in the chat when you're ready. But for right now, I wanted to just look at some of the cool comments from Ben and Mohan. So SAS sometimes just checks for specific words, even if you use certain less secure functions that are not vulnerable, is a comment from Ben. Mohan says, also, you may be using vulnerable library, but your app may not be impacted. Just like we were talking about, the SCA, it can't. There's 2 on the market that claim that they can tell, but I'm not sure if that is true. So someone's saying DAST can be more accurate in that it has less false positives, and someone else is saying an unauthenticated DAST is just not worth doing. I'm putting words into Mohan's mouth.
Interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Mohan probably meant that, because I think you're right. Unauthenticated DAST is very ineffective. Not worth doing.
Unless you have an app that doesn't have auth and has a lot of input, but that's kind of a very odd beast. Yeah, well, don't get me started on that. I had some interesting arguments early in my career about what an app was or wasn't. But one thing I was going to say about SCA, that's an interesting thing too, is I've spent time with teams arguing about if this particular piece of this particular library was or wasn't called than it would have taken just to change a version number in requirements.txt and run your QA test to see if it passed. Like it's, at some point you're like, can we just rev it and see what happens? Because if it doesn't break anything, why are we even arguing? Like I fail to understand why going from version 1.3 to 1.4 is a fundamentally scary thing, assuming you have good testing. Like obviously good QA and functional testing is important there, but if you have that, just rev the thing.
So fundamentally, that second part of that problem is exactly where it sits. They don't have that.
Yeah, and they're scared.
And the fact that they don't have that means that I'm scared that they have the wrong version to begin with, right? So you don't have enough testing to show me that this won't or will break if you upgrade the version. How do you prove to me that you don't use the function that's vulnerable? You can't. Like there's so many things wrong with this situation.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we have so everyone's being shy in the chat, even though they have been constantly chatting the entire time, and that is okay. But I want everyone who, even whether you're listening to this later or watching this later on YouTube, someone gave us a goal, but I want you, so I'm going to read Ben's goal after, but I want you, listener, watcher, viewer, whoever you are, to think of a goal where you work or where you're going to school, where you could improve the security and like, what could you do? And think about this. And if you're brave enough, tell your boss or tell your teammate. It sounds silly, but that's how I started. I literally told my boss, like, listen, we have had this many incidents over the past 6 months and 26% of them were from our insecure software. Like specifically vulnerabilities that were so easy to prevent. Will you let me do this, and this to try to prevent them forever? And I showed him how much they cost, and I showed him how much time it would take me to do it. And him and the two other bosses all looked at each other and they said, approved. And I was just like, I did a little happy dance out of that room. Okay, so Ben's answer is, I provide some, so his goal for me is to educate the clients and the devs after pen testing. Yes, I love that. So they don't repeat the same problems. And he provides awesome remediation advice on pen tests specific for that app. Mohan says, improve the dev maturity in AppSec in an iterative fashion would be a really good goal. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So that Ben,
I have some feedback for Ben too that I completely
Yeah.
agree with him on his specific and good remediation advice. And this is more for internal teams than maybe external pen testing. But one of the things I think is also crucial in a pen test is steps to reproduce. Like, and when I was at RAC, my mantra was, I need to be able to look at your findings 6 months from now and test it. Only reading the steps to reproduce, not like I sent a bad thing and things happened. Yeah, but did I have to have something in my cart before I did a bad thing? Like, I need all that, right? I need to be able to reproduce that because one, if you have good devs, they might take it upon themselves to reproduce it before they say it's fixed, which is fantastic. And two, if you're charged with really validating those things are truly fixed, those steps to reproduce are kind of handy. And 6 months from now, you may not even have a clue what that thing was that you wrote up. So yeah, those are both fantastic things.
Awesome. I have the last question now. It's happening. So I would like both of you to answer not current, but past roadblocks. So do you have current, so this is a question for the audience and I would love to see comments, but do you have current roadblocks stopping you from starting your first AppSec program where you work? Or have you faced this in the past? And if so, what were they? Or better yet, how could you try to overcome them so that you could get that new security tool or you could be allowed to start the Lunch and Learn series? So I have a zillion stories about me working at so many places. I worked at one place and I was hired to build an education program and security testing. And I was like, yes. And so I gave a Lunch and Learn and only 6 or 8 people showed up to the first one and then 10 or 12 to the next one. And my boss was like, this was a complete failure. And I was like, are you kidding? We almost doubled from the first meeting to the second meeting. And also they told all their friends and then they started emailing us and they started asking more questions. And for our next one, we had a whole bunch of people. And just more and more people started coming. So then we had to get a bigger room. And so I thought it was great. And she's like, we have 400 devs. And if 25 people show up, this is lame. I'm like, are you kidding? They're asking us questions all the time. They're asking me to come test their app. They're like, we're building relationships and it takes time. And like, it's only been like 3 months or 4 months, like calm down. And so like, then she canceled my ability to teach because she felt it didn't work fast enough and it wasn't good enough. And I was like, what?
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, well, we're not going to learn anything. Like, and so what happened is like, I ended up eventually leaving because she was just, she just kept canceling all of my things. And I was just like, but you hired me to do education. And she's like, I don't like how everyone's just talking to you and not me. It got very weird and confusing. And after around 6 or 7 months, I ended up resigning and going to work somewhere else. She also wouldn't approve my, like, so we have like security plan and we have security testing. And like the big director was like, I'm really afraid of you doing security testing. So we're just not going to do it. I'm like, you're more afraid of me than malicious actors? I am definitely so on your side. You have no idea how much on your side I am. And so they're like, just stop. We're not going to approve your security tool. So then I started just doing manual testing. And then they're like, could you just stop testing? They were just like, you're moving too fast. We're a government agency. We go slow. And like, you're so disruptive. And I was like, I have to go now. Bye. And then I joined private industry and I have not looked back.
Don't anybody correlate this conversation with Tanya's LinkedIn?
Well, I've changed it, so you can't see. I worked in the government 13.5 years. And you just can't tell where I was the whole time. but like the roadblock was just management was just, they were so afraid of change. They were so afraid of change. They were so afraid that their apps would fall down and I would break things. And they're just more afraid of that than all the security incidents we kept having. And, you know, if we teach the devs this, then maybe they'll hack stuff. And like, I guess like I gave a cross-site scripting talk and I showed them the cross-site scripting evasion cheat sheet. And then all of them were doing it to their own apps in dev. I'm like, who cares? This is great.
What a win. Yeah.
They're fixing things. It's amazing. And they're just like, I don't know. We're going to cancel it. We'll talk about it again in 6 months. I'm like, what am I supposed to do all day, guys? Like, what? So like at first I didn't understand what was going on. And then eventually I realized just management's really afraid of change. And that was my big, huge roadblock that I faced. And like, just to be clear, like my boss was the nicest lady ever. And she was trying so hard. And like every director just kept shutting her down. And she's like, we're trying. And so what roadblocks have you two faced? And audience, what have you faced?
Well, your talk about working for a government reminded me of back in the day. You can find this out on LinkedIn. I worked for the Texas Education Agency, which is K through 12 in Texas, which has millions and millions of student data in and amongst itself. And one of this was I earlier mentioned an app there where there was an SSO system that all the apps behind it had to remediate a vulnerability actually in the upstream system. And so that was where I did that fear factor list. And I'm going down this list of all of the things. And here's a like pro tip. If you need to and you don't have it, you need to understand how to risk rank things. Go to the disaster recovery people and ask them the order they start things up. And that becomes your de facto risk ranking, because presumably the business will start up the most important thing first and the least important thing last. And I leveraged that. It was a cheap backwards way to get a risk ranking. But so I ended up having it like, so I have this 120 some odd apps that I have to get fixed. And what do I do? Well, I start going down. And we actually had apps that didn't have product owners. There was nobody who owned the app. There were some apps that they didn't realize were still running in production. Like, wait, that's still running? Like, you know, Sally was running that program and she left the company 3 years ago, kind of a thing. And I'm like, well, it's in the list of things that are sitting behind this SSO. It's on my list. And so I had this whole like extra work to just figure out how to even get to somebody to sort this stuff out. And I ended up with a handful, 5, 7, some smallish number of apps that were just orphaned, completely orphaned. No one knew about them. No one had an idea whose they were. And I was going round and round trying to get this sorted. And what I finally ended up doing was going to and I kept bugging the head of the project managers to say, like, I need an answer to these last 5, 7, whatever it was. They kept dodging me and not answering my email. So I quite literally brought one of my favorite books and went to their office and sat inside their office reading my book until they walked back into their office. And when they walked back into their office, I said, I have these 7 apps. And this Friday, I have to report to the CISO who owns them. And since I cannot get from anybody who owns them, I have put your name down for the last 7 apps. And I just wanted to let you know. Thank you very much. I'll be going. And she said, wait a minute. Let me see that list. And she grabbed the list and she said, Johnny, Sally, Bobby, Johnny, Rita, whatever. She put the names of people on the list, and I had the odd job as the product security person going to the PMs and saying, by the way, this app you know nothing about, it's now yours. Like I had to resolve it somehow. So it's like, well, okay, like somebody has to own these things. And even if it's, and those were that last stable handful of apps, whatever, were the ugly ones that were the redheaded stepchildren forgotten apps that we're still, God help us, running in production that we did have to decommission, and there was some work behind it. But at the end of the day, we just need like an owner, and then let's work to get it done. And that's what I had to, push finally to get that done. Bit of carrot, bit of stick.
That story definitely, Matt, that highlights the conversation we've had multiple times now tonight over a catalog of applications that need to be protected, right? Because in the catalog should be this person owns this thing. That's kind of key to the catalog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So from my side of things, I guess primarily it's been we don't have time. This is not important. Those fundamental how do I care? Why do I care? Which is why I keep hammering on helping product owners to understand, firstly, why they're responsible for product security, and then secondly, to help them to figure out what the balancing act is that they need to try and perform. But those questions, the why do I care? I don't have time for this. My team is not spending time on this. And you actually mentioned it a couple of times, Tanya, that those were experiences you've had where, I have to get this out the door. I don't care about your list. I have my list. My list is more important. Your list doesn't make any sense to me. And we spend a lot of time making sure that our list isn't our list. It's their list. It's just something we've added to their list. And well, actually, we didn't add it to their list. They did. We just offered the ability for them to add it to their list. And the understanding that they should probably know those things that should be on their list.
Yeah.
But
yeah. How have you overcome that? Because I have used, so like I have like kind of a hobby of baking. I know that sounds silly, but like I will bribe them with cookies. I will literally bribe them with cookies. I've also done like Pavlov's dog positive reinforcement. So I'm like, I'm going to scan. I want all of the devs scanning their app with Zap. And I want you fixing, highs and criticals and mediums. And if it gets to me, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scan it with Zap. And if you fail, I'm not going to start my pen test. I don't have time for this crap. Right. So, so if you pass, I will come to your desk and I will high five you in front of everyone. So everyone sees the security chick just ran over to the dev area loudly. And I'm really good at high fives. If you look at someone's elbow, when you high five, you always connect really well. It sounds weird, but it works. And so this loud clap in our open office, and it's like public approval. But if not, I will come to your desk and I will make fun of you. I'll be like, dude, what is going on with your code? Like, I thought we had an agreement. Like, were you just ignoring me? Because you know that. So now, like, do you want to waste QA's time? Because QA are nice people. Like, they have stuff to do, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're like, oh, and I'm like, it's literally like, I'm going to make you feel embarrassed because you should be, because you know that we all agreed we would do this and your boss said you would and you didn't do it. And now you have Tanya in your office, like giving little pouty faces, and it's like pretty serious, but it worked.
So an in-person wall of sheep effect. I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah.
Well, and I'd been on the dev team and then I switched to the security team. So I was their peer. Does that make sense? Versus
Yeah.
when I was a dev, I would be like, oh, that's the security team. Those people, the wall of no. But it's like, no, it's Tanya who was on your team. Right?
Yeah.
Like, and she's like, what are you doing? Guys, help. You're making me look bad. Because I was our first AppSec person ever. And I'm like trying really hard. I'm like, guys. And being their peer and being able to understand the code and like literally knowing the apps, like some of them I knew them inside out, some of them I didn't. I'm like, come on, we know it's right over there. God.
So dev conversations, it definitely helps having a dev background, right? Actually being somebody who wrote code previously helps immensely in that conversation, especially if you wrote code with them, totally makes the doors open. But
yeah.
My problem hasn't been devs who don't want to fix stuff, because honestly, most of the organizations I've worked with, I've been fortunate enough that the devs, they get it. They get where the issues are. They're taking shortcuts with security in the same way as they would with any other quality aspect of code. And they're doing that balanced on what the product owner is telling them to do, what the product owner wants to get done. So it's those conversations that are more complicated, right? Getting the conversation going with a product owner who they want feature A, B, C. And yes, they want it to be fast. They want it to be this. They want it to be that. But the security, why? What's important there? Explain it to me. And there, I spent a fair amount of time going through interesting breaches. And then reversing those interesting breaches back into somebody messed up with a config on this S3 bucket. And that's why your credit score is shit. Sorry, excuse my language. That's why your credit score is in the gutter.
It's okay.
Because that chain of events, that's what happened to Capital One, right? That's if you take it all the way back, someone didn't review a pull request for a change to the access rights to an S3 bucket for a particular firewall.
Yeah. I like, honestly, recently I was talking with a client and they were telling me basically they wanted the devs to memorize ASVS basically, and then review code every pull request for that. And I'm like, so that's never happening. So what if we had a realistic conversation, right? So instead, let's teach them to review so they know what input is and all the zillions of places you can get it. And then like how to validate that input and when to reject it, how to reject it. And then how about we also talk about output encoding, make sure parameterized queries, like make like a list of 10 things that they review for. Yeah.
So the OWASP top 10, which is why I refer to the cornucopia as the top 5, right? It's data validation and encoding, it's cryptography, it's auth C, it's auth V, and it's session management. Those 5 things, pay attention. When you see those 5 things are happening, think about what you learned. Think about the stuff that we taught you. Think about the things we showed you could go wrong. And then, there's still the cornucopia suite, which is all the other stuff that is harder. But we'll get there eventually.
One interesting thing I did to sort of get some, this was more, these two, well, actually all 3 were really motivators, primarily with the dev team as opposed to with product owners. But if the dev team's behind you, it's pretty easy to persuade a product owner in a lot of cases. There was this internal conference at Rackspace called dev.io or something. I can't remember what it was called. That's too many years ago, too much sleeping. But this conference, we cajoled and nudged and argued our way into getting a slot. And instead of doing your traditional, this is security, this is why it's important, we basically did, hey, look at all this cool crap we broke at our office, right? And so here is real apps with injections in them. Like there's this, I used to use this for years, this picture where this kid had written all over his baby brother in the bouncy thing, marker all over his face. And we injected that into one of our apps and then took a screenshot. right? So like we have these like awesome screenshots of us doing ownage of our own apps in front of all of the devs. And they really, they dug that, man. They loved that. They ate that up. That was fantastically valuable because it's like, not only is this like theoretical alert box junk that I'm going to tell you is bad and then going to talk about it in a generic sense, here's real instances where we dropped the ball and it was real upfront and honest about it. That was super useful. At Duo, I was doing a whole bunch of automation around tooling, particularly on repo level tools, SAST, DAST, etc. And one of the things I made sure that was one of my design elements of doing this was any tool that we ran in an automated fashion could be handed to a developer to run before they checked in code. So there was zero excuse of like, you're making me run this gauntlet that I can't pre-check. Here's all the tools. Like, you want to know if you're going to fly through the gauntlet, you can run this all local. And you'll know if you're green local, you're going to be green when you push to prod. Like that was a huge win for the devs. And then the other one that was fun was what I would call like using pride as a motivator. Telling team A that do you need help from team B because team B figured it out and you're having trouble. Man, that got the heckles up. We don't need their help. We're smarter than team B. Team B's a bunch of idiots. How dare you suggest they come help us? And I was like, well, I don't know. They sorted it out in a week. They're like, they took a week. We'll do it in 2 days. 2 days, man. Okay, 2 days works for me. Right?
Oh my God.
It was hilarious. I kind of just threw that out there. Honestly, I mean, I'd love to tell you I was super clever and I had the whole psychology, but I didn't. I just threw it out as like, hey, these other guys figured it out. Maybe they could help you. Trying to be just generally helpful. And man, the hackles went up. But it got it sorted in a couple of days. So, hey, fine. Works for me.
That's amazing. Those are all such good ideas, both of you. Okay, so I just realized that we've been at this for 2 hours and 45 minutes. And so I am supposed to wrap up now.
Yes,
oh my
ma'am.
gosh, you two are amazing. Could both of you please, like say goodbye and brag about yourself and promote anything that's upcoming that's awesome that everyone should know about? Grant, I think that you should talk about how there's an election happening.
There is an election happening. So if you're an OWASP member, you definitely, and I may be too late to tell you to sign up to run for the board because I think it was the end of the month, last month.
Yeah.
So in that case, lucky, especially someone who I know is listening, you'll have to do it next year, maybe. I'll keep pushing you to do so. But if you are an OWASP member, please get out and vote when the voting starts. Take a look in your mailbox. Make sure your membership is up to date. Make sure that you can vote. Vandana and I are both up for re-election, but there are 4 seats available for the board this coming term. So get out there, pick 4 people you want to be representing you in the OWASP community. I have a lot of things that I want to do still. And a lot of things I'm going to do even if I don't get re-elected. But I think I can do a lot of work. That's good for OWASP on the board. And I'm a sucker for punishment.
Yay!
Yeah.
So OWASP members, make sure you can vote and consider Grant.
Yes. Take a look at all the candidates though, because they're really,
Yes.
we actually have a really good list.
Yeah,
there are
there's
a bunch
no
of people on that
crappy
list. I'm really, really keen. I would love to work with them. And if they asked me for my position, I'm going to be very keen on that because they're all great people. So yeah, and it's good to have people who are so keen to get involved. Other than that, I'm teaching. I'm working on projects. I'm working on Cornucopia. Cornucopia is going to have a couple of new releases hopefully soon. One of which will update all the references we have on there to the latest versions of ASVS, the latest versions of SCP, and all the projects that have expanded since then. And the Application Security Curriculum Project, which is a massive work in progress, where we're trying to take things like the ASVS and turn them into things that you should learn. And I really hope that Tanya is going to join me on that project and help get involved in trying to figure out these things should be like the standard people should learn. I know the stuff that Tanya's putting together from a learning point of view is really helpful. It's really useful. So yeah, hopefully you'll
I'm just
be
going to
involved
share
there.
that link again in the chat so that people can see it. So for the Cornucopia project, it's owasp.org and then /www-project-cornucopia. And it's really hard to spell, but it turns out that OWASP could guess what I was looking for. And then for the curriculum project, so owasp.org/www-project-application-security-curriculum. Yes, Matt.
Me. So things to promote myself with. Well, if nothing else, coming up very shortly is the 20th anniversary event for OWASP, and Defect Dojo will be speaking there as a project, and I will be one of the speakers. So come check it out. If nothing else, rah the fact that OWASP has been around for 20 years trying to make life better for people. Other things. Yeah, +1 on that one. And then LastCon is a local Texas event. So if you're in Texas or want to fly to Texas or go to Texas or can go to Texas, because these days it's rather interesting, they're having a 2-day they're having a 4-day conference, 2 days of training, and I'll be doing a training class there on this kind of stuff, application security programs, particularly around automation. That's kind of my bugaboo. I like to make things go faster or find ways to cut off rough edges for people. So I'll be doing a 2-day training there, as well as doing a talk on automation of DAST testing. And I am to follow on what Grant was saying. There is a really good crop of board members for this year. It's nice to see. It's a nice, healthy sort of indirect sign that OWASP is doing the right thing, because we do have a lot of good candidates, which is always awesome. And it's nice to see people try again and be willing to take the hit that it is being a board member. It's a lot of thankless work, and it's a lot of the unsexy drudgery that it takes to keep a charitable org running. And people will do that on their free time, which is really very nice and appreciated. And then the 2 other things that are really big in my life, Defect Dojo, obviously, I've said it a couple times here. Fantastic project. We are actually doing monthly releases. We have full CI/CD coverage on GitHub Actions. I worked with 2 high school students in a local STEM high school here, doing some work on UI testing for Defect Dojo, and we're going to continue working on that. I'm actually trying to talk them into working on their holidays as well, so maybe that'll happen. And then the other project that I have that's still kind of semi-active is the AppSec Pipeline project, which talks a lot about how to think through the ideas of tool automation and the flow of work through a AppSec program, like the different stages and how to think about things and make that like a much better flow of work. So those are the things I would mention.
10 security.
Oh, there's also 10 security. That's true. The training will be under the 10 security banner that I'm doing. 10 security is a security consultancy, and also is the original creator and myself of Defect Dojo run that company and do things, consulting, help people set up automation, all that kind of good stuff. Sorry. Thank you for keeping me honest.
You're welcome. I'm very subtle.
You are very subtle, and I appreciate that.
Okay, so things that I want to promote. I would like to invite every single person ever who's nice to join the We Hack Purple community. It is free. As of last month, it was free, and we quadrupled in size, which is awesome. And so if you go to community.wehackpurple.com, there's an OWASP channel, there's a DevSecOps channel, there's all these different areas. And then free events like this are publicized through it. There's also, we now offer free courses there. So we have a free course called Running DAST in a CI/CD pipeline successfully, because you better believe it, you can do that unsuccessfully. There's also a newsletter where basically we share blog articles that I wrote, funny memes, and then just like tips for security. And then eventually when we release products, we tell you about them, but we're not too pushy. So that's newsletter.wehackpurple.com. And then I have a newsletter. My newsletter is silly. It comes out whenever I damn well feel like it. I show you pictures of my garden. I tell you where I'm speaking. I list every single blog article or podcast since the last one in case you want to listen to them. And then yeah, there's usually at least one picture of my garden because it's my newsletter and it's whenever I want. It's a lot less professional, but there's still silly memes and it's definitely work appropriate. And then AliceandBobLearn.com. So I am starting to prepare to write the next Alice and Bob Learn book, which will be Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding. It's gonna be like 2 years before I'm done because I take forever because I say yes to too many things. But if you go to Alice and Bob Learn, you can be invited to all of these events. You can eventually we're gonna have places that you can get the book, places I'm speaking, blah 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 blah. I'm supposed to do that anyway. I feel like that is all the marketing that I want to do. That's like tons. I want to thank you, Grant. Thank you, Matt. Both of you were awesome. Today's session was just so good. I learned a lot. And quite frankly, both of you I really appreciate you expanding and adding to and giving differing opinions or maybe a different viewpoint of the same thing, if that makes sense. And I really, really appreciate both of you giving me your time. That's very, very valuable and sharing your expertise with everyone so that people can learn for free.
There's more than enough of this work to go around. I don't mind sharing.
Yeah, right.
And thank you for inviting us, Tanya. This was fun. I really enjoyed doing this with you. This was a great way to spend a Saturday evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, next time I should have a drink like yours. But anyway, that looked kind of delicious.
Yeah, I'm saving my drinking for when my university Texas A&M University football team plays later this evening, U.S. time. I will be imbibing during that game for sure.
Yeah, it's still early for you guys, right? It's evening here for me. So a Johnny Silverhand is well, yeah, appropriate this time of the evening.
Oh, certainly.
Okay, so next month is securing modern applications. So 4 weeks from today, October 2nd, same time, same place, we're going to talk about Chapter 8, securing modern applications. So serverless, infrastructure as code, security as code, paths, all of the things. I want to talk about how to secure those things, and it's going to be a lot of best practices. We're going to have on some awesome guests who you may have seen some of them before, and there might be some new faces. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I feel like we can wrap up now and see everyone next month. Thank you, guys. And Grant, I'm going to talk to you about playing fun cornucopia games with our community because honestly, I think that would be so fun.
Excellent.
Okay.
Cool.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Take care.
Bye.